Good day to all you SPs out there. You're listening to 107.5 FM WLRH Lecture Radio. Let me introduce myself. My name's Jordan Tucker. I'm 21 and the main character of Holly's book whenever she decides to finish it. I would usually consider not being in the story as a break, but I have a feeling that listening to Lafayette's word salad will suck even more. Before we turn up this snooze fest, Holly asked me to give a few shout-outs. Hello to her mama squirrel, Antics, also Judy and Journey. Links will be in the description below. Thanks to everyone who stops in, whether you catch this live or you're a member of the replay crew. Now let's get started on the St. Hill Special Briefing Course. Today we start Lecture 5, called Flattening a Process and the E-Meter. Good luck staying awake.
Here we are. I think this is the 1st of June. What planet is this? All right, this is a seminar, the briefing course at St. Hill. Now, what questions do you have today? Yes?
Is it possible for us in TR on model session to have some training in the meter? Because I found yesterday that an auditor I had just hadn't got this, and I kept feeling, she doesn't look at that meter, she's going to miss this fall. And
yeah, that's right. I get that myself once in a while being audited. I say, well, where are we? Just where are we? Because the auditor is sitting there doing an obsessive TR0. He's not doing TR0, he's doing obsessive TR0, you see. Which means to them, look at the PC. Look him between the eyes before you shoot him. Or something. And this obsessive TR0, you find this mostly in recent HPA students. They really go mad on this. They never do get themselves between the meter and the PC, you know. You can actually confront a PC, you know, by looking at a meter. Did you know that? Well, anyhow, that is a good point that you have brought up. Now, finish your question.
well, that's all. Is it possible for us to have that incorporated in a late stage as part of the TR0 in training and model session?
I should say that would be perfectly all right. I'd say it would be a sort of a high school version of it. You give the fellow a meter and let him have the meter in his lap while he's doing confronting. The coach, however, is not on the meter. And the only time this was ever suggested, it was suggested that the coach hold the meter with the PC not on it. I never quite got why the coach would be holding a block of wood which looked like a meter. That was the exact earlier one. It didn't have anything to do with it. But a block of wood or anything that had mass and weight while doing TR0, I would say would be an upper stage TR0. It would be a very good thing to do. And while running model session and so forth, why have a meter parked around? This would be a good thing. Your suggestion is very well taken. Your question is answered yes. Okay. Any other questions? Boy, I'm glad you're that smart. Gee, I'm glad you're that smart, you know. When I get up that smart, I'm going to be real proud myself. Well, if you haven't got a question, I will tell you about some mistakes that are made. The first and foremost of these mistakes is while running a level flat. Running a level flat. This is the commonest mistake which is being made in HGCs, academies, co-audits from Hell to Halifax. They don't run the levels right. Now let me give you a very brief summary of what this is all about. In the first place, we have discovered how to establish whether or not a process is flat. We have discovered how we can obey Auditor's Code, Clause 13. That's for the first time this question is answered for auditors. I never had any trouble with this. A lot of auditors never had any trouble with it, but the majority of auditors do have trouble with it. When is something flat? That was the burning question, you see. Did the needle whistle at you, or what happened? And as a consequence, they overran and underran and so on. And there was a great deal of conversation around this particular point down through the years, trying to establish this and bring it home or develop some kind of a system by which the communication would become adequate. That communication has been developed and is found in E-Meter Essentials. You run the PC on the tone arm. Now, there's an exception to this. There is an exception to this called the rock slam. And I will cover the rock slam as the exception in a moment, but don't think that I'm not aware of this odd exception, and it isn't an exception. But as long as the tone arm is waving about on a process, you are guilty of a breach of the auditor's code if you leave that process before the tone arm is motionless or nearly so. Now, we can communicate that, can't we? In other words, that E-meter will sit there and it will tell you whether or not a process is flat. Now, something can intervene in this. A PC between sessions. You should always notice where a PC reads before he goes out of session, and notice where he is reading when he comes back into session, because if the reading has materially changed, he's gone out and played with mud pies. And you'd better find out about it, because he's got a withhold from the auditor and so forth. That's the first and commonest error, by the way, flattening a process. The PC goes out between sessions or even during a break. In an HCC, maybe calls up her husband in Cincinnati or something of the sort and says, "Dear, I've just decided that you're the dirtiest, filthiest skunk I have ever heard of." Comes back into session again. And that tone arm is reading 6.5, or it may even be reading 7. You know, when a PC can't read on the meter, he is simply reading at 7, and that's not even a joke. 7 is between 1 and 6. And you'll occasionally find somebody who, quote, won't read on a meter. Well, it's just due to the mechanics of the tone arm. Don't turn through 7. Responsibility increases from 2 to 1 to 7 to 6. And you're going to find a PC every now and then, is not as rare as you think, running the hot bombs you're running, reading at 7. All right, so let's say the PC went off the meter. This is the most baffling thing I've ever seen happen to an auditor. The PC is ordinarily reading at about 5, comes back on, and isn't reading any place on the meter. And the auditor is liable to report the meter broken or something of the sort. It was just a fluke. The PC has begun to read at 7. All right. 7 doesn't read on this meter. 7 is actually higher in responsibility than 1. So anyhow, there ought to be a 7 on the meter. Okay. There's that variation. Now, as this PC goes out of session, reading at 5, and comes back into the session not reading on the meter at all, or reading 6, or more ordinarily goes out reading at 3, and comes back into session reading 5, and you just go on running the process isn't running. Why? Because something has happened to the PC that's given him his present time problem and so forth, and the whole thing about that is your rudiments are out. So therefore, when you stop sessions and give breaks, and start sessions after these breaks, you always start the thing with model session. This keeps you from making these flumdumptious errors, don't you see? So it's always a good thing to end rudiments before you go to have a break, and start rudiments after you've had a break. I don't care whether it's a lunch break or a cigarette break. See? As long as the PC has gone out of your sight during that break, you're going to have to run end rudiments and beginning rudiments. All right. Therefore, this won't get in the road with your flattening a process. See, because that could be a vagary and throw this whole computation out. The PC is running, the tone arm is waving madly back and forth. You have a break, comes back, the tone arm isn't moving. You say the process is flat, and then you go on and assess for a new process, and now you have a level left unflat on the case, and a PC being audited with a present time problem. You see, the solution to that is always keep your rudiments in. That is the smartest possible thing. Always keep your rudiments in. Okay, now if you inevitably and invariably do this, you'll be all right. And this rule applies then of you run a process as long as it produces tone arm motion. That tells you whether or not the process is flat. Now, this little rule about a quarter of a tone or a half a dial or something like that is a safety factor. It won't trouble the PC, and it won't assess again if it has gotten down to reading a quarter to an eighth of a dial of motion. You won't find that level again as hot. You understand? If you leave it that way for about 20 minutes, it's just moving that little bit over a period of 20 minutes, you can safely leave the process. That's the rule. Now let's see how the rule is got around. There's lots of ways to get around these rules, and this is the one which has now come up. And this is being done everywhere, broadly, and with the maddest abandon imaginable. Now that we have a way to flatten the process, we have abandoned the idea that it takes a process any time to get working. So you can run 5 processes in an afternoon if none of them ever started to work. And leave 5 processes unflat in a single afternoon's auditing. And it has just been done. London is just staggering around with ARC breaks from Ron and unable to flatten OW on Ron today. That's the literal truth. They had an awful time. Because Ron came down at 12:20 last night getting the last reports and found, I spent an hour taking it apart and so forth. I found that PC after PC had just been run level after level. I couldn't let it happen one more day, could I? You certainly couldn't have put another 5.5 hours worth of unflat process on it. And somebody just actually took their finger totally off their number, and even though this has been part and parcel, occasionally, on remarks, they have not caught it as it went by. When a PC has to read or be assessed with a fairly high sensitivity knob to get a third of a dial drop, this is always true, and it's occasionally true on other PCs. This is a rough PC now. That's some PC that reads with a high sensitivity knob to get a third of a dial drop. That is a PC that has a very low profile when he comes in. Any one of these conditions, not all of these conditions, have to be present to make this true. And it also may be that you're just running an awfully sticky level on any PC. You got the idea? So this could happen at any time. That you assess for a process, and then the first 3 hours of run on it don't really produce any tone arm motion, except 1/4 to 1/8 of a dial of motion, which of course is the definition for a flat process. Well, let me ask you this. Why did it fall on assessment in the first place? What mystery do we have here? Now, only a person who has got an occasionally floating needle, who is getting right up straight toward clear, can possibly flatten one of these things down in minutes. You'll notice as a person is coming through toward clear that they do flatten them in minutes, but then it becomes very obvious. The tone arm actually stops moving, and it doesn't stick. It simply stops moving with a fairly free needle. And it wouldn't do a bit of harm to overrun the process. Case is in a kind of condition to take it, you understand? But these fellows that get these jerky tone arms and have a fairly sticky needle and have different reactions of various kinds will increase in read during the first period of auditing the new level. They'll increase in read, and then they'll get good tone arm motion, and then the tone arm motion will die out. And then, when it is read for 20 minutes, for 1/8 to 1/4 of a dial of motion, it is flat. So that is the whole statement, with the one exception, which I will take up in a moment. That is the whole statement. In other words, motion quite often has to be run into the tone arm before it can be run out. You got it? And if a thing assessed, and you didn't get any motion from the tone arm, and you know this PC is not in marvelous condition yet, and so on, boy, you just better keep running it. And a funny thing, you should ask yourself this question. Why is it that hour after hour I can run this thing and it gets 1/8 to 1/4? Why? Well, it must be running something. 1/8 to 1/4, 1/8 to 1/4, 1/8 to 1/4, so on. It isn't tightening up. The other phenomenon that you're trying to avoid is the needle freezing. Now, when a process is overrun on a bad-off case, the needle will freeze. The first symptom of this, you're entitled to know, is a rising arm. Not a rising needle. Forget rising needles. But you got a rising arm. This PC has just been running along fine with 1/2 of a tone arm dial division of motion. Been running dandy. Sometimes full division. Sometimes a division and 1/2. Sometimes 1/2 a division, you know. And she's going along. And it's all between 3 and 3 1/4 on the tone arm dial. See? Between 3 and 3 1/4 here. All right, we look at this, and it's 3, it's going 3, 3 1/4, maybe it'll go up above, see, 3, 3 1/4, so on, like this. And here we go. And we, all of a sudden, 4, 4 1/4, 4, 4 1/4, 4, 4 1/2. And we say, boy, that was a nice move. Test it for 20 minutes because it's liable not to be that stick. It's liable to blow down. See? But if the first symptom of a flattening process is a rising tone arm. Now, there's some auditors around trying to prevent tone arms from rising or thinking they boo-booed if the tone arm starts rising. As a case is entered into processing originally, you will see this as the first, maybe some of the mystery of how I know whether or not the level you're running on the PC is flattening out will explode under just this one fact. It's the fact you've started to get higher reads consistently. In the last hour, you've been getting higher reads, and those higher reads didn't blow down. Now, if the higher reads were going to blow down, they would ordinarily have blown down in about 20 minutes or so. You see, they would have acted. But that, as it drifts up, first from a very minute motion, this is the actual behavior on the flattening of a process on a PC who is not, he's not up even to release yet. It's quarter, 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 an eighth, quarter, 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 and then all of a sudden you start getting it up, and it goes up about a dime, and then it goes a little bit, quarter, quarter, quarter. Boy, then's the danger point. Because this thing can actually go up to 5 suddenly and go clank, and you can practically hear the thing go clank. Now, there's no danger in it going clank. There is no danger in it going clank and suddenly sticking and you going on auditing it that way for 20 minutes. It is just going to make the PC uncomfortable. It's going to make the PC uncomfortable. And you're going to have to reassess. And you're probably going to have to reassess with difficulty because the bank's kind of froze up. That's the most that'll happen to you. If you were to run this for 3 days, sitting at 5 on a total freeze, as an auditor has done, 2 days this was done by an auditor. And of course, my God, you couldn't have assessed the case. You couldn't have done anything with the case except one thing. Run the auditor off on the pre-half scale. The auditor will assess. Did you know that an auditor will always assess when he is boo-booed? You know, you always take all the bad auditing off of a case if you run into any. You know that? And if you're real clever, and because you're here and I can tell you, it's all right to run very brief terminals, but you take somebody who's only been with the guy for 25 hours and you run that on the pre-half scale with a sort of one command or something like this, and it's just too brief, and it's messed up. It gets messed up. So, on a 25 or a 50-hour PC, I mean, where the auditor's only been with him for, I don't know, at the outside, 100 hours or something like this, you'd better take the case apart with some old-time process. You understand? What have you thought about that auditor? What have you not told that auditor? Any kind of an OW situation or something of this sort. Now, if the auditor is, let us say, the husband or wife of the PC you're trying to straighten out on this, or if there has been a long association going up in terms of years, now this then is a long-duration PT problem. Long duration is defined as years. That's a long-duration PT problem. Years. A short-duration PT problem is in terms of months or weeks. See? We say long and short, and then don't leave you wondering what we mean by long and short. It's years. So it's all right to take a PT problem of long duration, i.e. years, and assess that person as a terminal by name on the pre-half scale and run that level and reassess and run the level. Now look, do you know that it's probably less than 15 minutes a level? It may be as little as that. This is one of the exceptions to the running flattening on the tone arm. See, it's an exception. But of course you're doing something exceptional. So it's not much of an exception. You're doing something very exceptional. You're taking a person that, well, they've known each other for 10 years and you're running it on the pre-half scale, which is calculated to go on the whole track. So you're doing something exceptional, so you have an exceptional answer. And it disobeys the 20-minute rule. 20-minute rule, you don't run that for 20 minutes to find out if it's right. See, this is not the same thing we're talking about. When is a general level of the pre-half scale flat? That is to say, we're just running it generally. You know, whom have you failed to help? You know, that's right. That's the general run, the generalized terminal. Someone, somebody, you know, something like that. General run, or an SOP goals terminal, which means a selected general terminal, but it's a selected terminal, see? All right, that terminal, of course, that will just run and run and run and run and run and run and run, because if the PC's attention is fixed on it, he's in zoom. Now, these general runs, that is someone, somebody, whom have you failed to not help somebody? Whom have you desperately not intended to help and prevented everybody from helping? You know, that kind of a question. Very broad, you know. All right, that has a briefer run. So your longest run will be found ordinarily on the SOP goal selected terminal. Your next longest type of run is your general run, and those are long grinds, very ordinarily. And it is those I am talking about, those two types of run where you find the tone arm unsticking and beginning to move early in the process, then moving well, and then fading out. And getting down, and eventually, early in processing, they will stick. Well, if you can stop it just short of the stick, you're a good auditor, and you'll find it very easy to assess, and all is well, and so forth. But even so, you won't be in trouble, even though you stick it for 20 minutes. But look at here, don't you stick it longer than 20 minutes. An absolutely fixed, frozen tight needle for 20 minutes. You would have seen it approaching for a long time if you'd been watching. Motion would have gotten less and less and less and less and less, and it freezes. Now that is different from the person suddenly swooping from 3 to 5, and then it doesn't move at 5 for 15 minutes or something like this, and all of a sudden goes to 2. Or the person sticking absolutely at 6.5 and then suddenly swooping to 1. This kind of an action is not an expected, you wouldn't expect that needle now to stick. But this sticking needle is going to come about when you were running it all right and it already looked like it was getting flat, and your flat rule would have taken it off then. And then it suddenly rose up and began to move even less. Now all of a sudden it'll either move a little bit up usually or a little bit down and go clank. You can smell the rubber burning. Now, if you continue to run that tone arm while it's in that condition, day after day, man, you're not doing Scientology because you're in violation of Clause 13. You are running a process which no longer produces change. The only change it's going to produce, of course, is just sort of cave everything in. But it's not a beneficial change. Well, the process is not producing change, so you get off of it. Here and now you get off of it. All right. Now, what is this other exception? I said then that this rule is not followed going on with these things. The long duration PTP. The guy for the last 5 years has been having trouble with his leg. And he just sits in the auditing session with this hidden standard. He runs cows, crocs, and alligators with great happiness. And at each moment after he runs the command, or every few commands, why, he kind of theta-wise looks down at his leg, you see, to see whether or not that has been affected. Well, alligators didn't fit in that leg, so it must be something else, you see. He's running with his attention fixed on something else. And he broke his leg 5 or 10 years ago. And it has troubled him ever since. Well, you can assess that leg. And by the way, you can even assess it this way. His name, let us say, is John. You can assess John's leg. Something of that sort. It's always best to inspect the meter for a bit of reaction. But oddly enough, you don't even have to do that. You just know this is a long-duration PT problem. The best way to do it is to make a list of terminals that the PC thinks it is, and then take a specific one, not take a general one. You really want this thing to be a profession. You don't want it to be a profession, that's all. Because you run on it for quite a while if you take it as a general thing. You could even say, your leg. Point to it now and then, bring him out of the path. And it'll run. It'll run on the prehab scale, but of course, flat process as a law doesn't apply then to a terminal, which is a specific terminal being run for a problem of long duration. By long, we mean years. We don't actually mean longer than one lifetime. See, that's within this lifetime. And if we do that, voila, we will have that thing taped, but we run it on the needle. We keep an eye on the needle, clank, clank. Oddly enough, you will get tone arm motion, but it's a kind of a wasted time to kind of track the tone arm motion. All of a sudden, the thing kind of frees up, the needle kind of frees up or sticks or something like this. And you ask about it, you'll find out the tone arm has stopped too. But now, look at here. Here's the problem. If you ran this for 20 minutes, look, the whole run in the first place was only 10 minutes. Now you're going to test it for 20 minutes when there was a 10-minute run, huh? This isn't bright, see? It's something like measuring the depth of the teacup with a Kelvin photometer. You see, it's just not smart. So you have to kind of run it on the needle. That takes a lot of auditor judgment to run one of these things. You can't be a bad auditor and handle a present-time problem of long duration. That's for sure. You flub it every time. And also, you can't run a PC, horribly enough, who has a present-time problem of long duration on any other process than a present-time problem of long duration. There it is. That's it. You've had it. So the moral of that is audit well. Now, there is the exception I spoke to you about, which is running the rock slam. And that's not really a violation of a process is flat when it no longer produces tone arm motion. I'll show you this very clearly, that if you had set here, now you know a rock slam is pretty wild here. And a rock slam can be kind of this wide, see? That's a pretty good looking rock slam, isn't it? All right, now there it is, slamming back and forth there. It's going 2-3 inches. Actually, rock slams can be 1/4 of an inch wide, too, you know. But they're erratic. Not a theta bop. A theta bop is as even as a metronome, and a rock slam is very erratic. And look what would happen now. Look what happens to the tone arm as I make it rock slam. You got it? See what the tone arm is doing while I make this thing rock slam. Look at what the tone arm's doing. See, I got this meter just sitting here, just turned on and on set. And if to make it rock slam, doing that. Well, now I'm doing that with my hand. But supposing the PC was doing it to it with its bank. An auditor, I have to tell you a joke, by the way. I just got one through the lines the other day. This just got it through the lines. It was very, very amusing, and I hope when the auditor hears he won't be ARC broke, but I was quite interested. I misunderstood him completely. He said the PC can reactively influence the E-meter. So I'm having a difficult time running the PC. And so I told him, well, I'd exorcised all the demons out of the thing, so he didn't worry about that. But listen, that wasn't his question. That wasn't what his question meant at all. He believed that this PC was peculiar in that the PC's reactive bank was operating the E-meter. Now, this is an awfully good joke on this auditor, because that is what an E-meter is for and what it was designed to do. And of course the E-meter always tells you before the PC knows about it. You see, even though it's just a split second, the meter knows before the PC does. So the common and ordinary action is, of course, to ask a PC a question. You get a fall on the meter, you say, what was that? And the PC said, oh, was there something there? You know, that's kind of his feeling. Whether it's just for a half a second, he's still got a feeling on it. He will once in a while kind of feel a jolt in himself, and tell you. But he has this, you know, what was that, you know? And he says, well, that's time I robbed the bank. I robbed the bank, yeah. And the meter prays. And that's what an E-meter is for. And this auditor asked me, actually, put the question to me, that this was a peculiar PC, and that the peculiarity is that the reactive bank acted on the meter. But look, that's a good thing. This auditor, when he finally gets the answer to that, he's actually made a virgin observation of the thing, and he'll all of a sudden come up with an awful cognition on this. You got the idea? Oh, that's better than just fooling around with it with a box because Ron said to. You know? And I think in past years, auditors used to do that. They just used to fool around with the box because Ron said you had to have one in your lap. Because I would find the most remarkable settings on meters sometimes, and so forth. And all kinds of things going on, but had nothing to do with the PC or the case. It is connected directly to the PC's reactive mind, so of course you get this answer. Now, supposing the reactive mind was moving this that way, and instead of you seeing it on the needle here, supposing the needle were being moved by the PC's reactive mind, to hold the needle at set, your tone arm would be doing this. See? My God, how much meter action do you want? How much tone arm action do you want? See? Get the idea? Look at that. And you see, that's about what the reaction is causing over here. See? The meter can't even keep up with it. How much action do you want? Well, the oddity is that when you're running a PC whose goal has rock slammed, I'll tell you another little peculiarity when I'm going by it. I noticed the other day. You know, the goal becomes less intense after you find the terminal. Did you know that? Do you know why that is? Because the goal is the significance which surrounds the terminal. And the person's attention has been yanked off the goal over onto the terminal where it was fixed anyhow. You got it? So therefore, the goal, after you found the terminal, usually will read less now than the terminal. For a very short period of time, the goal reads as much as the terminal. But after you've assessed an awful lot of terminals, that goal starts looking awfully thin and ragged. And it still will fleck a bit. It'll still react a bit. But it was the right goal. And it isn't the time for you to start doubting, well, was that the right goal? Now, you could probably strip a goal off by stripping the fellow's attention off all the terminals that goal was represented by. See? And then the goal will go no. And if the terminals went no, then you go back and look for the goal goes no. You see, the person's attention is fixed on the terminal. See, there's nothing in a goal for his attention to be fixed on. That is just air and theta. See, that's nothing. But a terminal is something, and he got into this goal slide, and what you're doing is reversing this situation. He had a problem that had to do with a terminal. So he then reactively achieved a goal to solve this problem. And the goals he comes up with are solutions. If he could just do this, then that series of problems would be solved. You see, that's what a goal is. It's a solution to the problems which have been given him, usually by terminals. Of course, a terminal can also be just an idea to him, too, which is a bum thing. We hope it isn't. He was approached all of a sudden by this terminal, and he got a problem, probably got some overts on the terminal or something, and then eventually, because he got overts on terminals in this way, the terminal itself, approaching him, could overwhelm him. That leaves his attention fixed on the terminal. The little tag that is hanging out on the bank is goal. And you can always reach the goal, whereas you very often don't reach the terminal with any other assessment, see? I have found a more reliable tag in the goal. It's a little label, and it's sort of hanging out here in the light from the dark, dark bank, you see? And it's a little red tag, and it says on the other end of this thing is something that has overwhelmed the living daylights out of me. If you will pull here, package will open neatly. First observation that something like this would happen, by the way, is clear back in 49. Every engram, by the way, leaves its own little tag. The whole track may be in a complete spinning loop. All parts of the track are all parts of the track, and there it is in a crumpled ball. The odd part of it is that there's always this little tag reaching out of the ball that you can pull, and the track starts coming apart. You got the idea? I'll give you an example. This boy has always been worried about red caps. Red caps actually upset him. And for some reason or other, red caps are a very desperate and violent thing. So we'd better not have much to do with them. You get the idea? Red caps. All right, you go into this case on the subject of red caps, and you will find a nice, great, big, juicy engram that the PC knew nothing about. He was in a desperate automobile accident at the age of 6, and he hasn't a clue about it, but the driver of the other car was wearing a red cap. You see, there's always a piece of the engram showing. Well, now, we've gotten smart enough here so that there's a piece of the whole track showing, and that's called a goal. And you start knocking these goals out one after the other. You actually do start knocking goals out. It's a form of auditing. And as you move ahead, trying to find a goal, you eventually will find the biggest tag that has been left out. See, this little red tag, and it's the biggest, most visible one, and nothing will pull that tag. And that is attached to the toughest terminal that overwhelmed the PC. You got it? So now you go into your goals assessment. Well, don't be amazed that the little red tag now isn't quite so red. We pulled it. We got fingerprints on it now. And it isn't quite representing what it represented before. So after you found a goal, you proved the goal out, and it's there, and it won't change, and it won't move, and that is it, and in there it is, boom. Now, we actually follow the string down and find out what it was attached to. The PC's attention, of course, goes clang onto the terminal where it was fixed anyhow, and this little red tag will not read as much on the meter. Now, the goal won't read as much on the meter. The terminal will now read more than the goal after you really shook terminals out. You got the idea? It's only for a little while that this tag will read. Now, when you've got that terminal flat, you've got to check for the tag again. And when you check for the tag again, it's liable to come back and read better because you've got his attention freed off of it, and it may be attached to something else, too. So you always inspect the goal again. So goals tend to disappear on meter read, but they still flick, they still click, and so forth. All right, as you're running this case on assessment, this case develops on the goal a rock slam. And as you're assessing, these rock slams become more and more visible, and many falls are apt to drop into the category of rock slam. You start with a fall and you wind up with a rock slam. You got the idea? When you've got a rock slam assessment on a goal, you'll have a rock slam assessment on the terminal, or you haven't got the right terminal. Now, you rock slam assess on the PC on the pre-half scale. In other words, you assess only for levels that rock slam. Have you got the idea? You're running a rock slam case, and it's all going to rock slam from here on out. Have you got that? Everything's going to rock slam. So naturally, in running the case, you run the rock slam out. And if you don't have a rock slam, this is a conditional rule. Needs to be proven out a bit more, but I think you'll find it holds true. When your rock slam has been gone, there's no rock slam of any magnitude, for a period of 20 minutes. That level is flat for that terminal. You've got it? Why? Well, your rock slam is now somewhere else on the pre-half scale, and the more you run an ordinary falling level, the more your PC is going to get upset, because his attention is fixed over on here, you see, and he can't keep his attention off of it, so he's actually shooting to another part of the pre-half scale. Got it? So you run rock slams out, and the same rule applies. The rule applies uniformly and routinely, and that is simply this, that if you have assessed on a rock slam, whether on a general level or on a terminal goal level, if you're assessing rock slams, you must run the rock slam out only. And then for 20 minutes, there must be no rock slam on that terminal. And that's, by the way, by the stopwatch practically. That's really 20 minutes. Then you can consider that level flat and reassess, and you reassess and find where the rock slam is now. And now you will get a new level that is rock slamming, and you run that out. You got the idea? That's running by rock slam. But as I've just demonstrated to you, a rock slam is a terrific amount of tone arm motion. Fantastic amount, even though it's not visible. It's the needle that's going, not the tone arm. But if you were to hold that needle at set, if you could, you see, that was how your tone arm would be going for that level. Now, it can happen that a present time problem of long duration can rock slam. And that means that the PC is on his rock chain, which is his goals chain in this particular case. That's why we call it rock slam, because that's his rock chain, and his goal is sitting on his rock chain. And so you're running right on down his rock chain. Now, you're probably going to find more rock slamming PCs than you really suspect exist. There are quite a few of them around. They are not a rare phenomenon. But that's how you do a rock slam. If you do a general assessment and one of the levels rock slams, you've had it, because you now have to assess for rock slam. You won't find anything but rock slams on this case. You may find a fall, and then all of a sudden rock slams during the assessment. Well, a rock slam persists, and the difficulty in assessing a rock slam is that the rock slam persists for several levels after you've turned it on. So, there is a rule about this. Every time when you're running a pre-half assessment, or you're running a goals assessment, or something, and you turn on a rock slam, don't go to the next 5 levels without getting rid of the rock slam. Now, how do you get rid of a rock slam? You can run, essentially, TR10. That gets rid of a rock slam. You just say, floor, 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 and there's no rock slam. You got the idea? Now you say the next level. But boy, do you note that that one you just had rock slam, because that's now what you're going to be looking for. You start turning rock slams on a case, that's what you'll follow down to, okay? All right. Good enough. I hope you're doing all right with your training, and I hope your auditing is coming along fine. You all look better. All right. If you get a lot brighter tomorrow, why, you'll have some questions. Okay? Thank you. Thank you. I was just looking at a car outside that's got a hole in its fender. Oh. And I tried to audit it and it didn't respond. So it's in apathy. That's what you call line charge in one present time problem of existence. Okay. This is what? The 2nd of June, isn't it? All right. Now, I trust you have some good questions today. And what's the first one? Yes.
Regard to energies and flows in the pre-half scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, sort of a general question. Sort of, can you give us some?
All right, I'll give you some gen on that. That's a very simple question and a good one. We have this kind of a situation in a mind where we have a phenomenon where an individual has flowed in one direction too long, whether that is out or in, he has flowed in one direction too long. Let's take something on which I have a fair subjective reality, a writer who has written too much. You know, he's just written, it's out. All right, let's take another example. Let's take a shipping clerk. And he ships. And one fine day he wakes up and he says, the writer says, if I have to write one more book, I've had it. I think I will go off and join the French Foreign Legion. And the shipping clerk says, well, I feel very degraded and I'm going to quit. Why? Because these things have flowed in one direction. Well, it's a phenomenon, an electrical phenomenon, really. And we get an awful lot of our material from the field of nuclear physics, or used to. And now we're telling nuclear physics. That is to say, we're in a position now where we know a lot about energy and so forth, that the boys crawling in and out of the woodwork at the atomic energy university grant areas never heard of, and are always quite amazed about. The phenomena of standing waves, of tendencies of flow, sizes of particles, or if there are any, and such things as this are probably getting better known to us than to other people. And you get a ridge because actually of the inertia of the particle. It's no more complicated than that. There's a little bit of Newton's law of interaction mixed up in all mental activities by people who have gravity effective on them. Now, if you're affected by gravity and you don't float off into the air, then to some degree or another you're affected by Newton's law of interaction. Well, that's nothing much to you, nor here nor there, but actually is the basic reason for, and the postulates causing this thing, are the basic reason for frozen flows. For a reaction, there's an equal and contrary reaction. All right, Dayton believes this. So when he pushes a particle out, he also has the reaction, you see, of the particle coming back, you see. For instance, we push this E meter, and the E meter pushes slightly against us. Well, Newton's law of interaction is not true, fortunately. It is only true for objects of comparable size and mass. The reductio ad absurdum is you stamp against Earth stamps against you. Well, I've never had Earth stamp against me, so except when I was up in airplanes and got careless and didn't keep the airplane under me or something like that. And then it was obvious that I was standing still and Earth was moving toward me. But the point is here that for objects of comparable magnitude, a push against the E meter, you can actually feel it in your hand. There's a slight back push. All right, the facsimiles of these back pushes are neglected. Your attention is on the E meter, don't you see? Be pushing it. Well, your attention, the attention of the writer is on pushing out words and pages. And the attention of the shipping clerk is putting out books, you see. All right, so if this is the case, then they utterly neglect, and rarely, as is, because they're not terribly aware of it, this little back push. Every time you throw a book in the mails, you see, well, there was so much effort coming back toward one, and it's neglected. Similarly, let's say the colored gentleman who has a good high-paid job sticking his head through a canvas and letting people throw baseballs at him. I think that's a well-honored profession of one time or another in carnivals and so on. All right, so there he has these baseballs coming in at him all the time. The visible picture, you see, is made of everything, but his attention goes on the incoming baseball. Yeah, but as this baseball is coming in, actually there is a contrary reaction that he pays no attention to. Because he's interested in the baseball. He's not interested in that contrary reaction. He wishes there were more of it, if anything, you see, to slow that baseball down. And the next thing you know, he will have too many baseballs thrown at him. Now, it isn't the injuries of the baseballs or anything, it's just the fact that he's built up a ridge in front of his face that consists of not the incoming baseball, but the resistance going back against the baseball. You got the idea? Well, it's the resistance back against that baseball that sticks there, not the baseballs. So he has too many baseballs thrown at him, and all of a sudden gets a horrible feeling of pushing out that way. Similarly, the fellow mailing too many books gets a horrible feeling of a mysterious, undefinable pushing back against himself. You've got the idea? And he couldn't possibly explain what this pushing back against himself is. He feels like he has pressure on himself. Well, I had somebody the other day talking about she felt she had pressure on her face. See? Well, it's just this. It's the reverse push, so therefore it's inexplicable. He knows it can't be books, you see, because books go out. And this pressure he's feeling is coming in. And the fellow with his head through the canvas, he knows it couldn't be baseballs because baseballs come in, whereas this pressure makes him feel like he's losing everything in front of him. Got the idea? Well, he'll feel like he's losing everything in front of him up to a point where he can't lose any more in front of him without it becoming painful. See, he's got an outpush. See, the reaction of the mind against this incoming object is this outpush, this outpush, this outpush. And the next thing you know, he just figures he can't push out one more thing. If he did, it'd kill him. He's sure of this. And at this moment, he has a stuck flow. If you ask him to push out one more thing, he says that's impossible. The one thing in the world he knows he can't do is push out that one more item, and he goes unconscious. And that is dope off. It's flow too long in any one direction. It's not a simple mechanism where just flow too long in any one direction produces a stuck flow. I've given you the whole gin of it here. It actually produces a reverse flow. Flow too long in any one direction produces a reverse flow to it. You got the idea? So frankly, at that stage of the game, it's a toss-up whether he's going to pass out because you throw a baseball at him, or he's going to pass out because he resists something or tries to push something away from him. Get this exercise. Now, get the idea of a baseball being thrown at you. Now get the idea of throwing away something. That's as far as it's going to run without locking up, you see. Because now you've got to say, get the idea of a baseball thrown at you. Now get the idea of throwing away something. What are we doing? In essence, we're running really a flow that is all in one direction, but we're running the flow itself and his resistance to it alternately. And it goes flip-flop, apparently. Now, we say, get the idea of a baseball being thrown at you. Thank you. Get the idea of a baseball being thrown at you. Thank you. Get the idea of a baseball thrown at you. Thank you. Now, one of two things are going to happen. Either the field or the energy particles in front of his face are all going to go black. See, that's a symptom of a stuck flow. Or he's all of a sudden going to get an avalanche triggered, and the next thing you know, all the baseballs that have ever been thrown at him hit him. That's an avalanche. Brrr, they come in, you see. He could just as easily get an avalanche of resistance. But he'd be in awful bad shape to get the avalanche of resistance. You got the idea? Actually, what we mean by an inversion is the avalanche of resistance. You see, the fellow has no longer any effect from it coming in. He's only affected by resisting it. Now, if you want to see some guy in this kind of a state, and they are around in practically any case you can find this mechanism on them, you say to the fellow, now get the idea of resisting a baseball, and he gets the baseball in his face. Now you say, get the idea of a baseball hitting you, and he feels like he's going to fall over on his face because he feels himself pushing out. You got the idea? These flows have exactly turned around. And that's what we know as an inversion, and that's actually why we call it an inversion, because it's the flow gone backwards. Now, postulates follow this kind of a thing, you see. And the fellow will change his mind on the postulate. Instead of interest, he gets a peculiar interest. Well, it follows down the mechanics of this other thing. Now, why don't we run OW, 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 OW? Of course, OW is just dandy because that's out, it's in, it's out, it's in. It's reach, withdraw, but only from one person. And let me tell you something about reach and withdraw from one terminal. It doesn't account for all of the motions possible. Now, as long as the individual is below change, OW is effective. And he only runs well on OW from what he caused and what he withheld. As long as he's below change. That's the make-break point of OW. OW, a limited theory. I call your attention to that bulletin. I give you another datum right on the top of that bulletin right now, and that is that the limited theory of OW stops at the level of change. There is the point below which OW is 100% effective, and above which it ceases to be effective. Change is the explanation of it all. Why? Well, I'm sorry I don't feel as glib today as I did the other day when I explained it to somebody very glibly. But it was sort of interesting, which is sort of an involved explanation, and there'll probably be a better explanation for it, but I explained it perfectly, and then I didn't listen to myself. And but it's like this: the outflow and the inflow gets locked up in some particular fashion, and then below this level, the individual is totally individuated. He can no longer change his viewpoint. He can no longer experience change, and the moment he becomes very afraid of a change occurring, leaving him on some individuated point of the bracket, and as they go crazy, they don't go down from OW. On a lunatic, a real raving lunatic, you'd probably have to find the bracket that was live, and it would be way below OW. So it'd be some, well, I don't know, any one of 32 sides of the bracket, you see. It would be what others were doing to others that would be the only side of the bracket that would work. It'd be the others doing it to others, or something like that, and then that would be terrible. They'd have great reality on others doing it to others, and as you shook his mind up about it a little bit, you'd just shift him around on the bracket, and he'd say, well, isn't it terrible how I caused World War II? When you know personally he had a body and pawn on Mars at the beginning of it. He'll all of a sudden come up with obsessive cause. Well, actually, that's a high point. But it stays in for quite some time. As long as the individual is allergic to change, he individuates. Because the change on various flow lines are extremely productive of these ridges. Well, let's say the individual is fluid on the subject of change. He doesn't mind change. He can handle change, he can experience change. So therefore, the baseball coming in and hitting the fellow with his head through the canvas, well, if he could experience all the changes that were there, he wouldn't resist it. But if he starts resisting the changes and starts setting up this Newton's law of interaction, the next thing you know, why, he's halfway around the bend on the subject of OW. He thinks there will be a consequence of everything he does. He just knows he won't be able to breathe without there being a consequence. All he's got to do, therefore, to go through life, it's a perfect solution, is that every time you pass a sporting goods store, you don't look in the window and see a baseball lying there on display, you see. That's a good one. That's fine. Now, we know that. That's safe. You know, he knows there's going to be a consequence to what he does. Everything he does. So he knows better than to walk down blocks that have sporting goods stores in them. And then he knows better than to go downtown where there might be that block. And then he knows better than to go out in the yard. Because you see, you might see the town. And we get the odd phenomenon of somebody being stuck in the house, and then we can't figure out, why is this man stuck in the house? And we start running houses. No, it's baseballs. Now, there's the goofball reach of this, and it's practically unplumbable. But you can follow it down with an e-meter and find out why the individual's stuck in the house. He's trying to avoid being hit in the face with baseballs that are no longer being thrown at him. And this is very logical. All horses sleep in bed sort of a proposition. By the way, that's becoming such a stable datum that somebody told me the other day that they were going to start making Simmons beds for horses. Anyway, here's your change. So when an individual can no longer tolerate change, he becomes afraid of consequences, because the consequences of change, of course, are change. And he can no longer stand by consequences, so therefore, he's going to have consequences. So the moment that he's worried about consequences, why, he's into the OW bracket. That's why everybody on this planet can run OW so easily at lower stages. But as you go up on SOP goals, you run out of this. And I have not burdened your brains, and I have let you waste some auditing time by making you run all brackets from the beginning on everything, because the prehab scale is fairly rapid, and it will very shortly catch up with all brackets. You got the idea? The change gets level for a level of the prehab scale. In other words, the tolerance comes up, and all of a sudden, instead of it only be effective on himself to others, it becomes effective on other brackets. Now also, in view of the fact that the individual can be stuck on these other brackets, and then it'll bring it back onto himself, for a case below average, or a case above average, it is safest to run brackets. You got the idea? And for the average case, you waste a little time running brackets. But you had better not tangle your wits up with at what point he ceases to have the OW mechanism sort of thing cease functioning. At what instant, on what subject, does he have this function? Well, I couldn't calculate it myself, so I'm not going to expect you to. So the safe thing to do is run brackets. You got the idea? So fear of consequence, which is to say fear of change, results then in a resistance to change, which brings in Newton's law of interaction. The guy must resist changes or motions. So as soon as he has to resist changes or motions, he starts setting up these ridges, as I described to you at the first part of this statement. And when these ridges are set up, the only way to take them apart is take them apart on both sides alternately. You take apart the push out, you take apart the push in. Therefore, it doesn't matter whether the individual is stuck on pushing things out or stuck on pulling things in. You're going to take apart both of it anyhow. Then it doesn't matter if he's really spinny on some point or another, as most any mind is, another bracket out here to another. You know, this interchange out here, he's dispersed outside of himself, and this is really the one he's running, and while he's sitting over here and not running it, so it's best to have that bracket functioning too, don't you? And you save time, and you don't bog a case. Now, what it requires to run the exact number of commands necessary to get the exact flow out of the road is actually beyond your ability to detect at this stage of the game. But running all sides of a bracket evenly takes care of all the flows you will encounter without jamming any. So it's a way out of the rat race. Now, if an individual goes unconscious, which is to say he can't confront the change, if he goes unconscious at some point while you're running a good 5-way bracket, one of two things is wrong. He's either got a bracket that is so unbalanced that it won't take both sides of it. So, well, all right, so what? So he goes unconscious, he'll recover. Or, more particularly, he isn't doing one of your commands. And in view of the fact that this is the only one that can get in your road, but he isn't doing one of the commands of the bracket somewhere, then when a PC goes unconscious, you should always check if he is having tremendous difficulty with and isn't answering one side of the bracket. And if he isn't, all right. Don't hang him with it. Just check him over, you know. The way you do that is you ask just once around, you ask him the question, did you, not have you been answering it, but did you answer that? You just once around. Now, did you answer that to your satisfaction? And the fellow says, well, no. Matter of fact, I never have been able to answer that, a leg of the bracket. In other words, you're inadvertently guilty of having given a number of auditing commands without getting an answer. And you must always, one of the basic rules of auditing is you always get an answer to your auditing command. One command, one answer. One answer, one command also. Although that sometimes gets disobeyed when you run into a very looped up bracket that'll avalanche. You know, you're on some hot subject with the PC, and it goes brrr, and you've got a whole bunch of them. And the funniest thing I ever saw was a PC in the staff clearing course one time sitting there. He said, I can't answer the what have you failed to help, you see, because it just keeps going through my mind. And he looked very round-eyed at the auditor, and he said, it just keeps going through my mind. Who. You just triggered the automatic side of the bracket, that's all it's doing. Now, does that answer your question, Ken?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
All right. We got another question. Okay. Gee, I'm glad you're getting smarter. Yeah, Jan.
One came up today which was on just how much on the American meter the relaxation of the PC's hands while running a process may influence the tone arm position and whether it's just okay to allow for that. So you checked how much it just was with something not being audited. And whether you could just allow for that relaxation of the hands as being indicative of some mass shifting, so you count it as process effect anyway. You know what I mean?
Don't worry too much about it.
Don't worry about it.
It's just like I ask the PC now, all right, now, have you got a withhold? And he wraps both cans around his head and changes the shape of his feet and kicks the E-meter and backs up and coughs a couple of times and so forth. Well, I say it read. It read. I ask him again just to make sure. It always does. Similarly, this is just taken into the gross error of the situation. Trying to eliminate anything like that as an error would be nearly impossible.
Yeah, it amounted to practically half a tone on the American meter, just a relaxation of the hands. It wasn't even visible particularly.
That's right. I wouldn't worry about it too much, because they're not going to relax and tighten their hands for the bracket.
Yeah.
You know, you've got a meter, an inherent error in any meter that has to do with the PC being connected to it. And it's not a very gross error. You can do some weird things. You can have the PC hold to the tips of the electrodes, just with his thumb and finger, and get one of the highest tone arms you ever cared to see. Nice, heavy, high tone arm with a heavy needle. Yeah, you can just have him hold, just hold the tips of the can, just barely touching both cans, and you get a very tough-looking PC. But you can get a workman with calluses and have him hold on to the cans, and you don't get a tough-looking PC because of the calluses. Size of the person's hand might have something to do with it. A lot of factors could enter into it, but actually it's not gross. It's not enough to bother with. The E-meter tells you most everything you want to know, and in view of the fact that you're adjudicating basically on reaction of the meter over a given period of time, we can assume that the PC over any given period of time, if the process is flat, is more or less static. So you see, it wouldn't tell you the process was flat or not flat when it wasn't flat or something of this sort. It's not even anything that you should watch for, but you should do this with an E-meter. It's like it says in E-meter Essentials. That isn't kidding. That's a whole drill. You should actually get somebody to sit down and go through all the body motions that there possibly could be and handle the cans in all sorts of weird ways and lift their fingers and put them back again and cough and sneeze and just watch what happens to the needle and tone arm of the meter. And then that is the best way of sorting out body motion reactions on a meter, and you can actually get so good at them that you don't. The only one I have to look at is when I'm getting a rock slam, or I start to get a momentary rock slam of some kind or another. I will normally look over at the PC's hands to find out if he lifted his finger, because that can be approximated. You can lift your finger and get a rock slam, but it isn't constant enough, and you will all of a sudden see that it is the hands or it is the rock slam. You can differentiate there, too. But always make sure that it isn't somebody playing Morse code on the electrodes. Now, there's one more point about this. You can take both cans in one hand, as you do in these point-out things, and you will find out that the left side of the body, the right side of the body, and the right side of the body versus the left side of the body are all different. And this is apparently of great astonishment to many auditors, and it upsets them no end. Oh, I don't know, so that you remember the old epicenters? It just means the guy's epicenters are out, that's all. If you wanted to know if a PC's epicenters were in good shape or not in good shape, have him hold both cans in his right hand, then have him hold both cans in his left hand. Put Kleenex between them. And both cans in his left hand, both cans in his right hand, see if the read is the same. If the read isn't the same, his epicenters are out. What are you going to do with this today? Nothing. It's one of those little things we cannot live without knowing. You know, it's like reading the almanac. But I've seen auditors get quite concerned with the fact that it also will read differently if you shove them under the PC's armpits. It'll also read differently if you hold him down, take his shoes and socks off, and adhesive tape the cans to the soles of his feet. It'll read differently. But only in terms of how much resistance it's measuring. I can imagine that one day, if this e-meter ever gets into the hands of the government, that is about the 50% of the populace will probably be getting their e-meter checks that way. Cops will jump on them. Fellas, I won't pick up the cans, and cops will jump on them and hold them down, adhesive tape the cans to the soles of his feet, and find out if he murdered his grandmother. And because the guy is resenting it, anybody who would do that probably couldn't read a meter anyhow. And if he was a member of one of these existing governments, why, he'd then, of course, say, well, it had a reaction. Murdered his grandmother, that's good enough for us, hang him. Actually, that wasn't what they were after him for. It was because he hadn't not paid taxes. Yeah, it'd be a pretty confused picture. Was there another question?
Well, it was just that today we found out how to produce a perfectly steady, continuous rock slime on a meter with a body reaction.
Good.
Hands.
How do you do
Keep
it?
the cans in both hands and keep rotating like this, and you get a beautiful, steady rock slime that just goes on and on.
Good enough. All right. Take the cans in both hands and twiddle them and rotate them round and round and round and round and round, and you get a rock slam. That's worth knowing. It's a good way to demonstrate a rock slam. It's worth knowing how to demonstrate any of these phenomena. Very interesting. Okay, is there anything else? Yes.
I would like to have something on the tape with regard to why the various levels are on the pre-hab scale, because some people come up to me and say, why is this create here? You see, I have to tell them, well, this is obsessive create, you see. And I'd like to have
Tisn't, you know. It's reactive create.
well, reactive create, yeah.
All right, that's good. I'll answer that. Why are the levels on the pre-hab scale on the pre-hab scale? That's a pretty broad question. I'm not laughing at Susie, but I just suddenly realized that somebody asking that question, that would be an interesting question to bring up. Holy
No, I
cats.
just wanted the levels going through.
Yeah, well, that's approximately it. That is the same question. Boy, how much time we got here? Well, I'll tell you, I've been studying the mind for a number of years, and their various phenomena have been noted. And these phenomena are not necessarily in agreement with a sane and normal society, the way it thinks it operates. And that's why we're winning, because with a sane and normal society that everybody thinks is operating, nobody's winning. So you see, there would be, basically and foremost, we would have had to have recovered some of the broad differences between how people think it ought to be and how it is. Now, if we've recovered this broad difference between how we think it ought to be and how it is, then, of course, we can as-is some of the difficulties and upsets of a human being. But if we stay with how it ought to be, or how we're educated to believe it should be, we're hung with these alterises. Now, we've got in the pre-Haskell pretty close, actually, the way it is. And we haven't got in the scale the way it ought to be at all. So it comes in with a dull crash to find God at the bottom of the pre-Haskell. What? Cause and then faith. Well, I'll give you an idea. I'll give you a perfect substantiation. I don't hang around on the backs of auditors' chairs ready to stick out my chest like a powder pigeon and pat myself on the back saying I was right. I merely make a disgusting habit out of being right. And I sort of take it as a matter of course when it works out that way. Although it's usually very interesting to me that it did work out. Seems curious sometimes. But it's like this. PC the other day in an HGC was audited on faith. And he blew straight out of his head. Of course. Where would you think a level was at the first moment that an individual touched it? He would sort of kind of disappear out of the body and away and gone and here and there and every place else. Wouldn't you say that was a pretty low level? And yet that has been the most highly advertised commodity for the last 2,000 years that anybody has been trying to sell. You talk about selling blue sky. Everybody's been rushing up and down the streets with a nickel on the drum selling faith, 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 faith. You've got to have faith. You've got to have faith. We've got something here in which you don't have to have any faith to have it work. And that is, of course, the most astonishing thing in Scientology. So, here comes faith. Put it on the bottom of the pre-have scale because it belongs there, because it's a non-observational level. It is the most non-observational level there is. There is no other level that is as less observational than faith. Everybody's got faith. Well, by definition, faith is accepting something without inspection or observation and no checkup of any kind. Now, that isn't anything wrong with faith. There isn't anything wrong with doing this. If you didn't have some confidence in your fellow man and walked around a little bit blindfolded, you'd never get these surprise engrams. But I don't mean to be sarcastic. The thing actually is there. It isn't that Ron put it there. It's where it is. So there it is. All right. Now let's take up this next thing, as long as it's amongst us girls here. Let's take up this thing called, God. All right, let's take a one-act Nathan proposition. See, there's only one, and there he is, and he caused everything. Get that now. He caused everything. Do you realize what shape that God would be in right at this moment if he did nothing but make and create things? And you could never reach him and never say anything to him? Now, what do you think would happen? I'd say that anything, if it was just one Thetan that was called upon to make all these solids and spaces, what kind of a duress must this fellow be under to have to propitiate the lot of us that much? I think if there's anybody spun in, it must be this God. You look at all the signs and analyze it any way you can in running PCs or looking at live, and you'll find out at once that this cause Just cause, like that. I'm going to hit you with the thunderbolts, and you can't hit me. Brother, what that would do to a Thetan. So I figured God plowed in a long time ago. Now, that's an awful comment for me to have to make, but that happens to be my full belief on the thing. I've looked it all over from every side, and I can't get away from this opinion that if there was one God, man, he's had it. And I even thought one time, gee, we could whip together a handy Jim-dandy little religion here in the Society for the Resurrection of God. See, on the basis that the poor fellow plowed himself in, helping us all out, and that we should give him a hand now. I know this all sounds very loopy and very ridiculous, but that is why that level is there. It works there. Now, anybody who's on an obsessive cause is practically nuts. Now, we are talking about, of course, the reactive reactions. This E-meter tests reactive reactions, and that's all it tests. So if we had nothing but analytical reactions on a scale, then the scale would be of no use to us whatsoever. So we're looking for the deep-seated things. The pre-half scale is actually the reactive scale, the reactive bank scale. When an individual is at length able to have, he doesn't have to have a bank. So, of course, the bank disappears at the point have. So there wouldn't be anything to measure of any kind whatsoever if we measured it on the analytical scale. But there isn't anybody in this corner of the universe that I know about right now that knows what that analytical scale really is, except our axioms 1 and 2. That's the best description of it. So the analytical have scale, above have, the analytical scale, would simply be axioms 1 and 2. Those are the only basic truths there are. Those are fundamental truths. If anything is true, then they're true. All other truths are the result of postulates, considerations, and agreements. So as a result, it would just depend on what a bunch of Thetans got together and agreed would be on that scale. That's the whole thing. And they'd say, well, this is the scale, and we're going to have saucepans at this level, and we're going to have chimney pots at that level, and we're going to have singing Dixie at this level. And that's our scale. And in view of the fact that they were analytical and could change their minds and weren't very serious about it anyhow, of course, that would be the scale. Now, we're talking about the fixed, driven into concrete. Now I'm supposed to, this is it, can't be violated, this is why we're here scale, and that's the pre-have scale. And this is the order of the value of postulates, which are fixed postulates and which are not usually changeable and have never been changeable in the absence of Scientology. And that's what that scale's all about. But as far as that's concerned, I think it's a quite remarkable scale. Now, at some time in the past, at the beginning of track sometime, this scale must have been dreamed up just about like that. Now, to recover the scale again is quite a trick. Now, I'm not trying to tell anybody that all levels that are on the present pre-have primary scale that should be there are there. There might be some levels that aren't there. I could think of a dozen to put in offhand, but how much time have auditors got to assess the primary scale? They're all on the secondary scale anyhow now. Now, there are also some repeating levels on that scale. For instance, at cause, you might not get a fall at cause, and you would get a fall on blame, and blame was on the original scale, you see. So you have to watch that primary scale rather alertly. But there's harmonics, so you'll get more drops on the new primary scale with its 65 levels. You'll get more drops going up and down it than you would get on the old scale, because there's some action words in it rather than some conditions. There's another use to this scale that I haven't burdened anybody's wits with yet. by the way, just in passing I'll comment on it, and that is a combination inside the primary scale. And man, that can get so involved that it is marvelous. Let's supposing you assess no motion. This is the most flagrant example. Supposing you assess no motion, and as you're assessing you found out agree fell and falls, and no motion falls. Now you go into the secondary for no motion, and then into the secondary for agree, and you find which two falls on that, and you'll get some of the most remarkable combinations of commands you ever heard of. Just try it sometime if you don't believe so. You can't run no motion all by itself. The PC's just liable to run into a brick wall, so you can combine it with almost anything that's on the scale, but it's usually like, dislike, agree, or disagree. But remember, you could combine it with anything on the like, dislike, agree, disagree secondary scales, which gets pretty remarkable. And then no motion could be assessed all the way out onto its secondary scale, and you get some word for no motion, and you just look it up when you see these scales, and you'll howl with laughter because it makes some of the most fantastic combinations. But listen, it's going to make sense to somebody. All right. Well, now I hope I didn't mean to slight your question in any way, because it should be stated. I haven't given any lectures, done any talking about this prehab scale. It's just sort of grown, and the only lecture I know of about it, or the only lectures I know of about it, are in the Johannesburg Congress tapes. And it's advanced so far now beyond those that there's hardly any recognizing it. Its levels may not all be exact. They might not be the exact level they're in, but they don't have to be. There's no stress on this. Now, if I ever find one of them out, I'll put it right and tell you about it. But it usually is pretty good. The top of the scale is the top of the scale, and the bottom of the scale is sure the bottom of the scale. And individuals will start to get a rise as you go up that scale at certain levels, just like they did on the original prehab. So always pretty well with it. I'm very happy with it. Does that answer the question? Anything else about it? You sure? All right, okay. Is there anything else? All right, thank you. Thank you very much, and have a very, very good weekend, will you? Thank you. If this were a formal lecture, I would be wearing a jacket and a bow tie. But I find I'm not able to talk well with a bow tie on. Chiefly stimulating all the people I've hanged in France. Well, now, there are a few questions before the House, I am very, very sure. So give me a question here, quick. Yes?
You talked about what it means when a preclear comes in a different tone arm reading than he went out at. What happens if the PC comes in at about the same tone arm reading, but his sensitivity has changed sharply in the meanwhile? That's
an interesting point to notice. If the PC comes in with his tone arm out, you would, of course, at once be suspicious. You always check a PC's tone arm when he leaves session, and it's on your reports, and you always glance at the last reading so that your next reading, when he comes back into session again, you can check against that. And that is about the first thing you do between sessions. You look at that difference of tone arm reading, and if you find a vast difference of tone arm, you, of course, want to know what happened between sessions, practically even before you start one. You got the idea? It's of that order of emergency. Now, the things I have found on PCs happening between sessions are quite interesting. What do we mean between sessions? We don't mean overnight. We mean solely, strictly, completely, and utterly if they get out of the auditor's sight at any time during a break. I have known PCs to instantly go to the phone, call South Africa, or something, and tell the husband, I have just decided you're a louse and we are through. Clang, you see. And having expended 45 quid or something like this to deliver themselves to these sentiments, come back into session again feeling very self-righteous but won't run. You got the idea. It didn't take very long, but that was it, man. They got a brand new overt. And every time a PC's having trouble with a case, this is a subject of overts and withholds. So, now the question comes up, what if the sensitivity knob goes out? Well, this would be very strange and peculiar indeed, because it would mean the whole E-meter had turned a dial or two. You know, it might have gone all the way around the dial. It would be an accident almost that it would come up with the same reading. But you had better check both sensitivity and tone arm. That should be added in, so thank you for the datum. You've got considerable importance now, just speaking and carrying with that. Right along with that goes your rudiments in. Definition of rudiments. What it takes to get a session running and the PC in session. Definition of in session. Willing to talk to the auditor and interested in own case. Are rudiments a process to get the case on the road? No, they are not. You run rudiments with a third of a dial drop. Why? Because you've got a Joburg security check these days, and you don't have to be too sniffish for those withholds, and if it's a big withhold, you'll get it on a third of a dial drop if it's going to stop the session. The rule is that if the needle does not drop a third of a dial on the squeeze test, and at that setting, no rudiment clanks, the PC, you will find rather consistently, is perfectly capable of being audited. Got it? So you don't use rudiments to waste auditing, because the processes today and the rudiments are so much weaker than any other process we've got that you're wasting time. Got it? However, as you're going through with a third of a dial drop setting, the needle does a twitch. Kerbango. When you say, if you have a present time problem, it goes twitch, third of a dial drop. You've got to handle it. Now, how do you handle it? You say, now, what was that? And what was what? Well, I had a little drop here, and I ask you about a present time problem. Oh, well, I suppose that's by, I got to phone New Siberia, the American Medical Association address. I got to phone New Siberia at 3 o'clock and report, or something of this sort. And you say, well, is that a present time problem to you now? No, and it doesn't twitch. You don't run it. Also, that is the extent of two-way comm. Two-way comm that goes 4 questions turns into a process. You understand? And there are processes much neater for all two-way comm situations, and you're going to two-way comm. The American auditor has this frailty more than the auditors in other parts of the world. They'll run two-way comm for 2 hours. Don't do it, because there's just too many processes now, and prehab is too hot, and even the rudiments processes are hotter, you see, than two-way comm. But two-way comm does give it an opportunity to blow, and that's all you do is give the PC an opportunity to as is the situation. He doesn't as is it, process it. Don't two-way comm it out of him. Okay? Give him a chance to as is it by saying what it is, and the fall disappears, and you're all set. You can ask him as many times as you want to the same question or some variation of the question. You know, are you withholding anything? Are you keeping something from me? Are you embarrassed because you were being audited today? Have you had some nasty cotton-picking little unkind thought about the director of processing? Have you suddenly decided Ron ought to be hanged? If anybody's going to do anything to me, they better not try to shoot me. The only overts I've got that I'm tender on are hanging. They'll have to hang me. Anyhow, what's the extent, then, of handling these rudiments to get a PC in session? Third of a dial drop. And write down the list of bottle session. Asking them twice, 6 or 8 times, I don't care how many times you ask them, to find out what it is. That's one thing. Now, two-way comm would be a method of getting the PC to as is this situation. Oh, your withhold is that last night you made love to an ape. All right. Now, how is that now? Well, I guess it's all right. And man, if that needle doesn't move, Take it, man. That's all right. Just because you have peculiar ideas about relationships with apes. There's no reason to follow this up at all. It's all going to come out in the wash. Furthermore, if the PC is still dramatizing something, now wave your ears on this one. If a PC is still dramatizing something, it is too deep-seated to be reached in rudiments or by two-way comm. You got that? So PT problems, ARC breaks, that sort of thing, ask about them. If you see a twitch, find out what that twitch was. That's the first thing, see? Well, that's not two-way comm. That's just interrogation to find out what the devil the auditor PC relationship is here. All right. Now you found out what the twitch is, and it's still there. Ask him exactly what it was. He tells you. Don't follow that up with another question and another one and another one, you understand? Put your brakes on smoking right there. You say, well, he had relationships last night with an ape. All right, good. How does that seem to you? Clang! Well, what are you going to do something about this? In the first place, it's some kind of a weird, overt withhold sort of a situation. But it's certainly no longer a withhold from the auditor, is it? He told you. He might not have told you all. It's all right for him to tell you all of this withhold. You got the idea? But it didn't go away. Now's the time to run a process. Got it? This came up on a present time problem. See where I'm heading? You see, asking present time problem, you got this kind of an oddball answer. What are you going to do about this? You better find out if it's a problem to him or what it is. Get rid of it. Get rid of it one way or the other on the rudiments. That's the best rule. Don't let it go off into the processes. But you're not going to handle the situation as a neurosis or a psychosis or something of the sort in the rudiments, you understand? You're trying to get it out of the road for auditing. Or you say, what part of situation could you be responsible for or something like this because it's a present time problem? And he tells you, answers a few questions, how does it seem to you now? You don't get a fall. On to the next one, man, quick. If it doesn't as is with two-way, you can ask him all the ways you want to. It's a misdemeanor on your part, arrestable in the court of high counsel, for you not to ask him something in several ways to find exactly what it's falling on. You understand? That's a misdemeanor not to do that. But now, to go on nattering on two-way comm, trying to get this thing as is, as two-way comm, is a lousy waste of time on your part, that's all. Because the process will do a lot better. You found out what it was, and it didn't as is. Now you run a rudiments process. All right, you got a rudiments process, it knocks it out, you carry on. Now this interesting problem comes up. Supposing the person has a big withhold from George. Big withhold, see? So you run OW on George. Well, in the first place, you've done something a little adventurous. It's all right. Go ahead and do it. But you get tone arm motion on OW on George. Oh, that's too bad. You're running OW on George. You better run it. You better flatten it. But there are dozens of better ways to handle George, don't you see? This is kind of unfortunate. The tone arm starts moving from 3 to 6 on OW on George. Well, now you got a process that's biting, you got a PC that's running, and you've had it. What do you do with it? The rule is the tone arm has got to be a quarter of a division or less for 20 minutes of auditing before you can leave a process. This applies, unfortunately, to the rudiments. That's why you're always hopeful for a null needle on the rudiments, because you don't want to audit the case at the rudiments. But at the same time, if you ignore a drop on the rudiments with a third of a dial drop sensitivity set, you've had it. You won't do anything in that session. Now, you could crank up the sensitivity to 16 and ask the rudiments. Now what are you doing? You're running the case, aren't you? Are you withholding anything? Ladies and gentlemen and fellow students of Homo Sap, it takes 7 hours on some people to do Joburg. And you've asked it in one lump question. Now what are you going to do? Sensitivity 16 is your mistake. It wasn't a rudiment that fell on a third of a dial drop. By definition now, what is meant by a rudiment out? One of the rudiments are out, and the case is being run with the rudiment out. Now what is meant by this? It means there is a reaction with the meter set at a third of a dial drop. A visible reaction on the needle when the meter is set at a third of a dial drop. If there is a visible reaction on the meter with it set for a third of a dial drop on the can squeeze test, that rudiment is out, and you've got to do something about it. You got it? Now, what about these cases? What about these cases that keep trying to go clear on us? And I suddenly realized the other night, although I've given you advice that you'd better get your sensitivity knobs fixed, you know you're never going to get them fixed. There is no sensitivity knob that'll turn off far enough. When a person starts going into a floating tone arm state, when they're up about release, it'll just float further and further and more, and you'd have to turn the sensitivity off further and further. And at some point, the meter's going to become non-functional. So, you would be going toward the same situation as simply turning your sensitivity knob off. Well, if a PC insists on dropping 3 dials on a third of a dial drop can squeeze with your sensitivity all the way off against the off switch, see, I'm afraid there's only one other sensitivity cut down that you could do, and that's just turn the meter off. So what happens to this rule as the person goes clear? Well, the rule is not very important as the person gets loosened up to that degree. How do you like that? It is not very important. Because what is the behavior of a needle as the individual gets more and more up toward clear? The needle swings less and less on heavier and heavier charges. That's interesting. I had a DP ask me fairly recently, well, I don't think this is correct about this third of a dial squeeze and the sensitivity and that sort of thing, because people are coming in here with loose needles are obviously in very bad condition because they don't get much needle reaction when you ask them about ARC breaks and things of that sort. Naturally, it's not a charged question to them. But on somebody who's plowed in down on the borderline of the nether regions, you ask him if he's got an ARC break, and you get wham, 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 wham. And you say, well, what was that? And he says, you lighted a cigarette while you were lecturing. Free floating needle, as the case is advanced on up the line. This is about 3 dials can squeeze. So you've got a sensitivity as low as you can get it, 3 dials can squeeze. That's all you can do about it. So you got an ARC break, and you get a 1 dial division drop. See, there's a very loose needle, and you get a one little die division, one of those little tiny things. It's about 1/4 of an inch long, see? And you ask him that, and you say, what was that? And he says, well, actually, I was withholding it from you that I just wrecked your car last night. Only this same person would be also in this category. You'd say, what? You know, it'd explode all over the place. And you'd say, well, yes, I also took it into the garage, and it's now been repaired and is sitting in your garage. You get entirely different action. Of course, he probably wouldn't have wrecked the car. But look, you get some kind of a reaction like this. You lighted a match while I was thinking. You see, 3-dial drop. Now you see a twitch on that. You see a twitch. Of course, you can only really read them in twitches, but on such a case, and you say, what was that? You say, well, I wrecked your car last night. It's still lying out on M1. Police are looking for you as a hit-and-run driver. But I didn't do anything. It wasn't my fault. Actually, you left the keys in the ignition. And you generally will get a smug smile following it. You get an entirely different set of reactions to the same existing situation. Is that clear? I'm covering over rudiments with you and what rudiments amounts to and what immediate reactions amount to and so forth. We go over these things quite often. What they are the most important thing, because if your PC is not in session, you're not getting any auditing done. But we have to define what is meant by a rudiment being out. It means the rudiment is out. You have to correct it. Well, you can always find a rudiment out. How do you like that? Just by turning your sensitivity knob up to 16 and say, are you withholding anything? Or do you have an ARC break with anybody in the whole world, any place? Is there anybody anywhere in the world that you have an ARC break with? Well, of course, you're going to get needle reaction. So your auditing is totally reduced down to doing nothing but rudiments, nothing but rudiments, nothing but rudiments, nothing but rudiments, nothing. And they're not very good processes. So the 2 hours and a half that you have for an auditing session, you spend 2 hours and 15 minutes running the beginning and end rudiments, and you spend 15 minutes on the process. And that isn't what's getting the case there. The rule is the case cannot be audited with the rudiments out. What is meant by rudiments out? A visible reaction on the needle with a 1/3 of a dial squeeze setting on the sensitivity knob. Does that mean that a person who has a very loose tone arm then could have allowances made for him? So that he gets a drop on a present time problem, and you know he drops about a dial, and you can't set it down any further than a dial. Does that mean you ignore his twitches? No, he's in for it, but this is okay because he'll blow him on two-way comm. You'll say, what is this ARC break? And he'll say, well, the cook sneered at me this morning. He put a sneer on my shredded wheat biscuit. You know. And you say, how do you feel about that now? There'd be no further reaction. You see, the looseness of a needle at minimum setting is a direct index of state of case. The most direct state of case index there is. This is your diagnostic switch right here, this sensitivity. And if you, to get a 1/3 of a dial drop, have a guy sitting here at sensitivity 16, and even then don't make it, you're dealing with a CCH case, brother, and don't think you aren't. We've broken our hearts on enough of them. CCHs they get. You understand? Now, that doesn't mean that all cases that are run on CCHs are instantly in this horrible condition. But it does mean that the case has not been showing adequate gain in processing. Processing over a long period of time. We have a record of this processing. It hasn't been showing enough gain. There must be something haywire someplace. We check them over. We can't find present time problems. ARC breaks with holes. They just don't seem to have anything here any place. Well, you've got the CCHs, so you return the case to it. Just like you can turn an SOP goals case back into a routine 2. Now, you're going to get that bulletin in very short order if you don't have it right this minute. I imagine we're pretty stacked up in the bulletin department. We're getting out the secondary scales. But you've got 3 routines these days. Routine 1, is CCHs and Joburg security checks. And CCHs and Joburg security checks. And CCHs and Joburg security checks on a 1-for-1 ratio. Experimental at this moment that is 1-for-1. Why? The CCHs boost up the individual's responsibility for his environment. And then he blows his head off because he's now all of a sudden got withholds that he now feels responsible for. So you have to pull the withholds off to keep from killing the case. You got it? You raise the case level, he runs into his withholds, begins to be more responsible for the world around him, and all of a sudden, crash, he's had it. He actually feels like somebody is running over him, like God Juggernaut is letting him have it, you know, complete with the stone wheels. He feels terrible. You increased his responsibility, you realize he's guilty of many things, all dynamics, and you give him no opportunity to get rid of them. And that is the only thing that has ever been stalling cases in Dianetics and Scientology over the last 11 years. That's the thing that stalls them. That's why they hit a ceiling and halt. They halt because it'd kill them if they got any better. Because if they got any better, they'd be more responsible for what they've been up to on the whole track. You got it? All of a sudden they realize they have overts and withholds, and it damn near kills them. And this would work out with almost any case. So, you run the CCHs to increase their responsibility, and you pull off their withholds with a Joburg. And that's the routine. I don't know quite what the optimum ratio between the CCHs and the Joburg is. I don't know if it's 1 for 1, 1 for 2, 1 for 3, who knows. Hour for hour I'm talking about. What do? Security check them for 3 hours and CCH them for 1? Or CCH them for 3 and security check them for 1? Well, we're just taking it out at even level and say, well, we're going to start in at 1 for 1. So that's what it is right now, 1 for 1. 1 hour Joburg, 1 hour CCHs. All right? That means that you don't suddenly stop a CCH process that is terribly unflat and give the Joburg after 1 hour, you understand? But if you've been 5 hours flattening this, you can be totally prepared to spend 5 hours on security checking. Got it? It's however long they've been running the CCHs up to a temporary flat point. One more mention of this. CCHs are run in strict accordance with Clause 13 of the Auditor's Code. A process must be run only so long as it produces change. It's not a direct quote, it's an interpretation of it. It's a breach of the Auditor's Code to run a process that is not producing change. It is a breach of the Auditor's Code to stop a process that is producing change. Got that? What's changed in the CCHs? Well, you run CCH1, CCH2, CCH3, CCH4. Let us say that all during the running of 1, the test is 20 minutes. The person, whatever they're doing, must be no change of reaction in 20 minutes. Got it? 20 minutes, no change in the PC. Now, what's that mean? Well, the PC's a meter. What would the PC be reading on a meter if the PC were trying to leave? Come on, what would it be? That's right. The PC is the meter. You don't have the PC on a meter. You can look at the PC. Right? Got the idea? All right, now let's get another one. You're trying to run CCH2, and there they go, and you're getting them all set and so forth. All during the time, they're just running like a wound-up doll, see? There's no change of reaction. There's no change, no comm lag, no nothing for 20 minutes. Man, that's flat. As far as you're concerned, it isn't biting or it's flat or we don't care what. And you go on to the next one. You got the idea? All right, supposing on one of these CCHs, the PC is simply 1-5ing the entire time. It's madder than hell, you see? The idea of running such a process on me, you realize this process is only reserved for psychotics. Actually, it used to be. It isn't now. Process is only reserved for psychotics, and you think I'm a psychotic, and who do you think I am? And they keep this up for 20 minutes. Process is flat. You look, huh? Supposing the PC lies down in the middle of the floor and can't be made to rise for 20 minutes. Process flat. You got it? So the process is run in strict accordance with Clause 13 of the Auditor's Code. Run a process only so long as it produces change and no longer, and don't stop a process that is producing change. You got that? Well, that doesn't mean, by the way, that you have to audit him all night. But that means the next session you're running the same process. See? That process has got to come up to a flat point, and the flat point is 20 minutes without a change. Whatever the PC is doing. PC insists every time he walks up to the wall that he turn around and with one foot kick it. And he's been doing it for 20 minutes. He said it. You are no longer critical of what the PC is doing and no longer trying to force the PC to do the process. You just carry out your upper indoc type CCHs and carry on as much as you can, but you're not trying to force something on the PC particularly, you understand? You're trying to do what he can do. Obviously, he's incapable of giving you his hand during that period of time. Now you say, well, normally he would get over that sooner or later. Yes, he'll get over it sooner or later, go on to the next process. And when you finish up 4, you come back to 1. You find out he's incapable for a while of giving you his hand. In the first place, you're auditing a valence out and the PC up. And the only thing you get a reaction from is the valence. So if the case is progressing, why, this valence is acting up because the valence fights for survival. You got it? There's calm lags. There's various things occurring all the time, all the time, all the time. Well, for heaven's sakes, it's not flat. So you carry it out. You got how to run them now? That, by the way, is the original CCHs taught in London in 1957. We've gone right back to base on it. It is not for psycho. They were originated ordinarily just for cases that weren't getting results on various processes. The case wouldn't get results on higher processes, so we just kicked an awful lot of PCs over into this particular category. And London has had a great deal of success with CCHs up through the years. At the same time, I didn't have much of a chance to straighten out the HGC as to how you ran CCHs, and they weren't running them very good, and they were, be perfectly happy to sit there and ask somebody to give you their hand, and they give you their hand, and do it just for 20 minutes. No. 6 hours, 25 hours. The individual simply getting his hand. Just run it for 25 hours. It's a breach of the auditor's code. If he gives you his hand for 20 minutes on a stretch, that's it. Furthermore, the CCHs are not run in model session. You say, here we go, that's it. That's the beginning and end of the session. I'm going to audit you now. This is the first process. I'm going to say, give me your hand. You can tell him anything you want to. You can even say, well, it isn't going to hurt you. Anything you want. I don't care what you say. But it's not run in model session. You don't pick up the ARC brakes. You don't pick up any of these things. Why not? Because obviously if you're running that, the person doesn't easily blow these things. So you can just become completely involved with the case. See? Completely involved. I'd say the criteria would be this. If you did a long assessment and finally the goal of the PC is to get even with the janitor, who is a momentary present-time terminal, and this is the only goal you can find on the PC, I'd say you were probably assessing somebody you got along faster with CCHs. See, terminals backed all the way up to PT. Got the idea? Now listen, it is not that you couldn't win with the other routines on the same case, because we are no longer doing routines because of case levels. That's a new surprise for you. See, we've always had low cases get routine 1, and the next cases get routine 2, and the next cases get routine 3, or something like this. You got the idea? It was always graduated that way. Well, it isn't now. It's what is the fastest case gain you can obtain for the least amount of auditing. Okay? And it is all in the interest of saving auditing time, because all of these work, by the way, all 3 routines that we have work on the same level of case. You could take Roddy Green and find his goal, find his terminal, assess it on the prehab scale, and run it. You'd get there. But your auditing ratio may be something on the order of about 2 to 3 for 1. Takes you 75 hours to get there, whereas you could have gotten there in the same period of time in 25 hours. You got the idea? So it's just in the interest of saving auditors time that you do these things. Furthermore, the auditor doesn't get bogged down or upset because his case isn't winning, because he's being yapped at. You understand? Makes a smoother look all around. So all 3 routines work on all cases, which is riches indeed. And you could expect sooner or later when we hit the jackpot and pull that old one-armed bandit's hand and the gold sovereigns started pouring out of it all around the floor on technology, that this is what would have happened. We would have had at least a couple of routines that would have worked on all cases. Now we've got 3 routines that would work on all cases. There isn't a person here, by the way, who wouldn't pick up on the CCHs run in this fashion. CCH 1, 2, 3, 4. You see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Just run as long as they're flat. It's very rapid running. We looked on the CCHs as being a very slow grind. Well, I point out to you that in 1957 they were not a slow grind, and they were being run in the exact style which I'm telling you about now. See, we got it lost because I couldn't quite grasp what was going wrong. We put it mainly down to the fact the auditor's intention wasn't getting across to the PC. That's not true. That has something to do with it. But that's not the answer. The answer is a much more clean-cut answer than that. The auditor was disobeying the auditor's code, Clause 13. Okay? He was not running processes as long as it was changed. PC fighting, you know, and say, well, I'm not going to run this process a minute longer. I'm not going to run it. And the PC keep fighting him for 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, whole intensive. He'd say, well, I got to get someplace with this PC. I got to get someplace because the PC's fighting, you see. No, the PC's fighting is no change. No change by reason of the process. But you can say, well, look, the process wasn't being administered. Oh, you're looking physically at what it happens to about 75% of the cases you have trouble with is they never do the mental process that you give them. Except now you've got it physically. He's not doing CCH2. Only you can see he isn't doing it. I've had a PC come up to me and say, well, you thought that auditor was pretty good that you had there, but I just had 25 hours intensive running. Didn't do a single command, he said. And I thought, well, you dumb bastard. To myself, you know, you dumb sap. You mean to say that you wasted 25 hours of auditing time and gave the fellow something on the order of 50 quid or something of the sort just so that you could have the wonderful opportunity of never answering a single one of the auditing questions but fooling him for 25 hours. Oddly enough, to the PC, that would be eminently logical. Well, you've got it out in plain broad air that the PC is not about to do your auditing commands, haven't you? Well, so what if you had him on a mental process on the meter? What if you had him on a mental process on the meter? And he wasn't doing the auditing command, but appeared to be, you know, saying, You ask him, what are you thinking about? Oh, I'm thinking about the process. Got a machine. Got a machine set up like a clockwork toy, and every time you say the question, he goes, and anything to do with anything you said. You say, do fish swim? He says, the auditor is trying to probe my secrets. Got the idea? Now, it's just an extremity of alter is. Now, how much alter is there on the case determines what process runs in the fastest. So let's run CCHs and get any alter is out into the clear or anything of that sort. But anybody could gain on any of these routines. So I'll go over these other routines with you very rapidly. I'll just tell you what they are. Routine 2 is a general run on the prehab scale, Joburg security check, and the havingness and confront processes all run in model session. I think that's the extent of it, isn't it? Is there anything else in there? PT problems of long duration are assessed for terminal on that routine. You find a present time problem of long duration, you know, keeps banging present time problem or something of the sort, and you run that, you assess that on the prehab scan. You find the terminal, and you find the terminal about the problem that drops the most, and you assess it on the pre-half scale, and you run it flat, and you assess it again, and you run it flat, and you assess it again, and you run it flat, and you assess it again, and run it flat. That's PT problem long duration. Fastest way to run one for auditors at large. Actually, you can get some places running engrams on them, pre-session 38, but this other one is very, very easy to do and reaches all cases without any difficulty, so why not do it? All right? That's the extent of routine 2. What's routine 3? SOP goals, assessment. Assessment for goal, assessment for terminal. And this is run flat, level by level on the pre-half scale with what? Second step, Joburg security check. All 3 routines have the Joburg security check in common. What are you trying to do with this case? You're trying to unveil this case and get this case up to a point where it is willing to make an advance. What do you mean unwilling to make an advance? All right, if the case is unwilling to make an advance, so long as and continually, when the case finds he is turning on powerful and fantastic resistances and somatics and things like this, he doesn't dare get any better. Because if he gets more responsible, he's had it. Have you ever noticed that there are some very pretty girls around in the world who have a high level of irresponsibility? Have you noticed that? Well, actually, if you ran them into the middle ground, their beauty would be less. In other words, you'd audit them for a little while and increase their responsibility, and they wouldn't look so good. You got that? Isn't that odd? They'd be better, but they wouldn't look so good. You got the idea? Well, that would only obtain so long as they were stacking up withholds that you weren't getting rid of. So you could take a person who was quite irresponsible, but good-looking. Nothing they've ever done has any influence on the body. Now you audit them, it has some influence on the body. They've got to shoot the rapids sort of up the Niagara River, you know. They got to go up Niagara Falls backwards. And it's a rather battering experience. Well, it becomes a very unbattering experience the moment that you keep cleaning up withholds. And you're going to see this phenomenon continually. You make a little case advance, and all of a sudden you're on a long grind. What's happened? Well, the PC doesn't dare get any better, that's all. See? Case advanced rapidly, and then something stopped it. You know, and then you grind. You've all seen this. Well, what was that point of the curve? I had to find out. Well, it's the withholds. They suddenly get responsible for their overts, and then they haven't any chance to tell you about them, or unload them, or unburden them in any way, and they just start kicking their heads off, that's all. You'll find somebody who's had a case improvement, who has improved just a little bit too much for their tolerance, suddenly standing back of the chimney sobbing bitterly. You got the idea? I'm no good. And we've had some casualties with that. That is to say, somebody is blown or something like that, you know. It's been improved a bit, but it was too much for him. You got the idea? Because improvement means an increase of responsibility for his past, present, and future, which of course includes all the dirty, mean, nasty, cabbling little two-bit tricks he's played on everybody. And how did he get those things? How did he get those things excused? He lessened the overt. The old bulletin on lessening the overt, which, by the way, should be part of your bulletins. And they lessen the overt, and now you audit them, and they suddenly realize that that person they were so nasty to wasn't probably quite that bad. See? And this overt starts to swell up on them. Now, you're doing it with processing, and this is now a 10,000 horsepower operation, see? And the PC puts his 2 horsepower up against this thing, you see, and just tries like mad to stop the juggernaut. Only this overt keeps unlessening. Joe was not so bad. God, what's going to happen to them now, you see? So their whole effort now is to keep the overt from unlessening. And they no longer have their attention on the process. Got it? That's the exact mechanism. So the case improves, You get a fast improvement curve, get the width holes. All of a sudden, you get another fast improvement curve, get the width holes. Get another fast improvement curve, get the width holes. That's the system. You got 3 routines with which to do it. And cases which are having difficulty answering auditing commands, or having difficulty in auditing, or who would only run on SOP goals in some kind of a present time situation, probably will audit faster on the CCHs, as a general rule, than they would audit otherwise. They'll make more progress. You got the idea? You can get this person back up over Niagara Falls without so many chain hoists. It's easier. Instead of standing in there boxing with the altruists, which they're not about to take responsibility for or run out. So you don't go on the basis that everybody, just because you alter the altruist, you might not be able to find it exactly. See, the altruist might have something to do with have and would be. You know, any kind of a Hobson-Jobson situation where they're fitting one substitute with another substitute, you might not hit it exactly, and you'd have to keep hitting it exactly. And it's very expert. Requires a lot of expertness to do that thing. You get their mind going off like a firecracker almost continuously, and you can do it. It can be done, you understand? But it's probably slower. Certainly for the average auditor, slower. All right, so the combination there is that this is the best thing to do for a case that might hang up otherwise. Now, your next general run, your next general routine is actually basically there. All cases would benefit from it, and it would be faster than routine 3 in a lot of cases. But I have found out that auditors who are specifically being coached at long distance from us, which is very difficult, actually are able to do what is now routine 2. They can do it. They can kind of dub around and make it work, you understand? But boy, you get them on goals and they're over the hills and far away like a bunch of white-tailed antelope, and you just see these little spots of light in the distance. Man, they don't grab that one. I've got it on my comm lines and from HGCs and from every place ad infinitum, and they just no latch. They can do general runs in pre-half scales. Read one bulletin, do a general run of pre-half scale. That's it. Do a Joburg security check, miss 50% of the questions, but it's still functioning, see? You get the idea. It's still functional in their hands. You see that? But this doesn't say that you couldn't take the person you're going to do CCH on and find his goal. And it doesn't say that the person that you're going to do the general runs and Joburgs on, it doesn't say you couldn't grind in and find his goal. You can actually find the goal and terminal and so forth on anybody that you try. It's just a little arduous. That's a little more arduous. Takes more time. So in the interest of swift clearing is what these 3 routines are all about. And that's the basis on which we're operating today. And of course you're here to learn about this, so I probably won't see you doing as many routine 2s. You will probably get more routine 1s and routine 3s than you get 2s, but in some HGC someplace or out in the bush of back of North Wallaby, you'll see an awful lot of routine 2, and you meet somebody back in North Wallaby, and he say, "Oh, we're having so much luck on SOP goals. Esther spun last night." And you say, "What are you running?" "Oh, we did a long assessment on her, 20 minutes, and we finally decided her husband was what was her trouble. So terminal was a husband. And it was by elimination. We talked it over in the rest of the conference, and we decided that was the only possible terminal. So we ran a husband on her, and so forth. And the next time we did an assessment, for some reason or other, the whole scale was live. So we just started at the top and tried to run each one flat on the husband. And you didn't give us all the data, you know, for SOP goals, and it doesn't work very good either. But you give them this routine, too, and they go off like a bunch of canary birds, and they get wonderful results. Okay?
Question on routine 2.
Yeah.
The general assessment, is that done purely on the primary scale, or do you carry it over to the secondary as well?
Oh, you can carry that right on through to the deepest depths of the secondary. All assessments can be done primary and secondary, or just primary. The worse off a case is, or the more clear they are, the 2 extremes both have to have secondary runs on assessments.
Do you ever switch from one routine to the other?
Yes, you sure do. Case isn't running very well on his goals terminal or his assessment or something, shift into 2. It'd be upsetting, though, to shift from 2 back to 1, because it's invalidating. Make up your mind at the beginning. If in doubt, always run CCHs. If you're in doubt whether you should be running CCHs or 2, run CCHs. Does that answer your question? All right. The more you shift on changing your mind, well, the less sure you look and the less control you've got on the PC.
Precise running on CCHs, left, right, or right and left, both hands, then...
Yeah, and on your head, and then there's CCH1X. There's CCH1X. That's a good one. That's a good one. PC gives you both of these socks. I don't mean to make nothing out of your question, but it brings up this humorous point, Ken. It brings up this very humorous point. The more CCHs I put out for various variations, the less CCH was run on the basics. And actually, the variations practically killed the CCHs, the variations did. No, it's just right hand, man. It's always right hand. You're not trying to clean this fellow's life with a CCH. You're trying to improve his case so you can get off his withholds. You got it? When you got all his withholds off, and he's totally responsible, and he's clean as a wolf's tooth, he's going to be floating, almost floating here on the needle anyhow when you finish this up, you understand? And he's going to be so free on the needle that you start doing an assessment, and he starts blowing clear on the assessment. You got the idea? You wait till you see this, you realize why we're running. I apologize for making a mock of your question. Yes?
Would SCS still come in the CCH?
There are no SCSs in the CCHs. CCH 1, 2, 3, 4. There are only 4 of them that are valid. Now, the SCS does have a high CCH number. But you've got to read I see right now, you've got to read your CCHs from beginning to the end, because there are only 4 of them, and what was known as the CCH routine is exactly a precise routine consisting of 4 processes. And that's the only CCH routine we mean. We mean no other variations. Okay? Right. Okay, any more questions? All right, thank you very much. And that's it for tonight. Good night now. Well, here we are at the 6th of June, and our course seems to be going very well. If you don't recognize me today, actually, as I explained to Edgar, it isn't actually that I like to wear my hair long. It's just that there aren't any barbers. Go ahead, I dare you. Try to find one. Since we took Edgar out of the profession, there's nobody anymore left in the world who can barber. There's a small fee for this commercial. All right. I suppose by this time you actually have in your small, moist palms a copy of the HCOB that has to do with these routines. Is it in your hands yet? No. Well, then it probably will be tomorrow morning. It's the first bulletin concerning the routines and so on. Now, what's going to change that bulletin? Let's look at the future just a little bit. We are not now trying to find out what auditors need as theoretical or ideal tools to clear people. We are not at that stage. We passed that stage a long time ago, actually. We are trying desperately to discover right now what auditors will use and what they can use. And SOP goals and its related processes have been in development for use for some time. Please understand that as a difference of action. There's two things. It's what will auditors use? What will they use? And what can they use? And these two things monitor what is put in their hands. You got the idea? Now, at first, just the prehab scale was put in their hands, and they had pretty good success with it. Here or there, just general runs on the prehab scale. They weren't able to goof it up too badly. And they got some good success, and I had some rather resounding profiles sent in here, and everybody seemed to be very happy with the idea of assessing the PC on the general scale and cooking up some kind of an auditing command, even a bum one, and running a PC on it, and rudiments in, out, or upside down, you know. And they got somewhere. They got somewhere with this. We got some good results. So we have to assume that an auditor not only will do it, but can do it. See, one, and is it well accepted, and two, is it within his realm of ability? You have to think of that when you're training students, training people in Scientology. It's what they can and will do. Now, if you have somebody who can only run CCHs, and you have him in a group of people who are doing auditing on outside PCs, well, wouldn't you be rather foolish to give him a set of tools that he would not or could not apply? Because immediately your auditing results would break down right at that point, sharply, clearly, and immediately. You get the idea? Auditor can run CCHs, and yet you say, run the Hubel-Goobel's second differential of the integral Zim. And that's what it sounds like to him, see? I mean, you've said something very comprehensible to you. You said, find his havingness and confront process. And yet it sounded like the gobbledygook I just gave you, see? Doesn't make any sense to him. So, with great willingness, perhaps salted down a little bit with making you wrong, he will go ahead and louse up the lot. Why? Well, he's being told to run something. He thinks he should understand this. And you may come around for a long time and find out that he just hasn't told you he didn't understand it. Now, the test of anything is whether or not it produces results. But remember this, that a result is determined by several things. One, the adequacy of the tool being employed. That is the first thing a result is established by. That is first and foremost. Nobody will argue about that at all. If you haven't got the tools, you can't do the job. That's it. And that's what Scientology is, basically. The tools to do the job. Now, this is modified by what auditors will apply, or what people will use. You see? What will they use? And that again is modified. What can they use? So we actually have three sets of determinisms here on what is a good process. It isn't whether or not the process, used under ideal conditions, will produce every time a stratospheric flight. You see, that is not the test, all by itself. Without that, nothing is going to work, that's for sure, but it's monitored by these other two things. And when you're training auditors, for God's sake, keep that in mind. We've had the principle for a long time, but I never articulated it. And one of the parts of it was, if somebody comes in raw into an HGC, you find out from him what processes he has been having success with. You could also ask him this one, oddly enough, what process has worked on you? And he says, HC. I had a wonderful game back about 54. Nobody's run it on me since, but back about 54. I had a wonderful game on HC. And I've run on a lot of PCs and so forth. And you say to this fellow, all right, that's all you're going to run on PCs. And you know you'll get better profile gains than if you told him something else. You got it? Until you can get him trained up and get a reality on something else, you had much better let him run something on which he has an adequate reality. And if he's going to get a result, it's because he himself believes he can get a result. Now, you can enter far too far into the esoterics of all this. Look at the factor you're involved with. If an individual doesn't have a subjective reality on something, you cannot expect the individual to employ it with reality, can you? And there's nobody more sensitive to an unreality in a pre-clear than an auditor, but certainly there's nobody more insensitive to unreality in an auditor than a pre-clear. Yeah, that's true. So all of these things are monitoring factors on what auditors can and will use. And right now, auditors broadly have apparently had considerable success with the CCHs over the years. They've been running them all wrong and backwards because they've been running them doctored up and changed and altered and improved, see? When as a matter of fact, it was something on the order of trying to improve the last space fleet that was developed in the last galactic empire at its utter peak, you see. And from there on, all you were doing was pinning pink roses on the things. You finally pinned enough pink roses and blue bows on these spaceships until eventually the fleet didn't fly anymore. That's about what happened. Now, the original CCHs was the only thing on which I did any research, and it was done in the vicinity of 1957. I didn't employ them thereafter. There's an interesting story in connection with that, because I personally wanted to find out if I could audit this way. And I trained myself within a hair's breadth of auditing the CCHs. I could audit those CCHs in my sleep. You know, put on the perfect tone 40 performance. You know, I groove myself in like your learning model session. You know. And I found out when I used this, I got tremendous and very worthwhile gains. But it was used according to the old regimen, you see. Now, all the research was done, all of the training of people on how to do it was done, and then I skipped it, and then we had an ACC or two, and I ran into modifications. For some reason or other, they weren't quite as keen to do the original version as they were a modified version, students. Now, I just give you that in passing because this mustn't happen again to the CCHs. The CCHs worked perfectly when done a la 1957. That was their nadir, and that was it. And it was CCH 1, 2, 3, 4. And they were done this way up in London. There's some old tapes up there that utterly fascinate you. I think they're in the other room here. All about how you do the CCHs. And they're mostly tapes of... Don't alter, is it? Thank you. Don't alter, is it? Thank you. Don't alter, is it? It's about what they amount to. That's what Ken ran into head on here the other day, because we had actually a good process system destroyed by about 1958, and it was less and less in use. Well, why was it less and less in use? I wasn't paying much attention to it, and I was finding out that it wasn't producing the results before, and now that we need it, I've turned around and reviewed it, and I find out what is now called the CCHs bears no resemblance any more than little Eva did to Topsy in Uncle Tom's Cabin. They're just not the same breed. CCH is very simple, they're very straightforward. You do all the things it says, you put your intention into the PC, you don't Q&A with the things he does. You hold actually his body in an exact position. You run him close up. You're not trying to do anything but increase his reality and his control. You see, CCH means communication, control, and happiness. And if you get this duplication, this was the sneak factor I suddenly discovered about the time of the first St. Hill ACC. There's duplication. So the less duplicative you are, the less happiness the PC has. Interesting, isn't it? Well, anyhow, there's the CCHs. Now, the security check proposition. Now, I'll tell you what auditors wouldn't do, the world around, what they wouldn't do. They wouldn't be imaginative enough to get the withholds off the case. I'll give you an example of a security check that was written in a central organization. And I actually ought to frame it as how not to win. It says, do you have an ARC break with Norma? Do you have an ARC break with Joe? Do you have an ARC break with Bill and Pete? Thank you. You've passed the security check. One just doesn't penetrate reality to that extent while one is taking responsibility for it. See? One won't be responsible for taking the reality of this, because it's pretty grim asking for withholds. All right, auditors were perfectly willing to make people well. They were perfectly willing to audit people. They were perfectly willing to work with the most confoundedly gee-whiz cases you ever heard of. But ask for that withhold? Well, they weren't unwilling to ask for the withhold. They were just unwilling to be sufficiently imaginative to do anything concerning it. Oh, a fellow murdered his first wife, you see. The auditor'd never bring himself up to feeling that critical of the human race. You get the idea? Well, maybe the fellow just beat his first wife. You ask him if he murdered his first wife, and he'll tell you, no, I just beat her. So you can always over-ask a question, and auditors would not do that. Imagine it. They'd sit there with the rudiments out, the rudiments out, the rudiments out, the rudiments out. Well, it was killing people. I mean, not actually, but it was just murder, you know, the guy's feeling bad and so forth. Auditor never asked for the withhold. So we had to remedy this, because this was a rather whirled-around condition. And that whirled-around condition resulted in what, when I got down to South Africa, I found that somebody had dreamed up a security check on my orders down there to parallel the laws of South Africa. And these laws are very imaginative, because they're dealing with people who have extremely imaginative crimes. And actually, there were things in there that I myself wouldn't have thought of doing. It exceeded my reality. But over a period of years, South Africa had collected them in their law books. Oddly enough, the South African security check, here's a joke on Johannesburg, contained originally no single question concerning overts or withholds on the organization, any staff members, any Scientologist, me, or anybody else. Isn't that fascinating? Had omitted that 100% from the zone of interrogation. And the people who were putting it out had overts really only in that field. Fascinating, isn't it? All right. Now, I put together this thing, doctored it up, and called it the Joburg First. But for a very long time, to show you how hard this one is to get into operation, people will eventually wake up and use it. Oh, they say. You know, you've been standing there, you've been screaming, you've been saying, use nothing else but it. Now, use that. That is a security check. That is what you're supposed to run on staff members. That is what you're supposed to use when you security check somebody. You use this form, Johannesburg Security Check, HCOWW Form 1. Understand? And they say, okay, do you have an ARC break with Norma? Do you have an ARC? Lots of people would like to rewrite this security check. And apparently the law is this. On rewriting security checks, it works like this. If the person is permitted to delete or skip one of the levels of the security check, or if you give it to somebody to take certain levels out that do not apply, the person takes out the very withholds he has, even though he doesn't remember he has them. Isn't that curious? So you must never permit a security check to be rewritten. You must never permit one to be edited for special use. You understand? I learned these things by accident. Oh, you want all the Johannesburg security checks sent in to you personally. Well, here are all the security checks on the staff. We've only given one Johannesburg security check. They've had it for months. They've got another security check. Got the idea? Mm-hmm. So you have an HCO policy letter along about this time of life that says the only valid security check And when we say the only valid security check, we mean the Johannesburg security check, or by whatever name it may be called by HCOWW, and it will only be the complete form of a form issued at HCOWW. Got it? That's how hard that one is to hold in. That's interesting. They will give a security check. They will learn how to give security checks. They will ask the most outrageous questions as long as they are written down and are part of a security check. But then you've got this other impulse all the time that is going around. A little bit here, a little bit there. Well, it's not necessary to ask this questions about illicit diamond buying. That's only applies South Africa, and we're up here in northern Siberia. I was speaking, by the way, as though we're in Chicago. I'm trying to pass laws out in Chicago these days that everybody who is pronounced crazy by anybody that happens to know his name are instantly shipped to Alaska. Did you know that? Wonderful way of clearing up the political scene. Only trouble is the people who are in power, when they dream these things up, never quite remember that someday they're going to be out of power. That's because they don't know they're going to live another life, too. It's very, very amusing that all the legislatures and so forth on the laws they pass, because they're old men and no longer affect them, walk into their next lifetimes and they're totally subject to all of their conscription orders, to all their educational orders, to all their child labor, blah, blah, the whole lousy works, you see. You talk about being cause of your own effect. God help a legislator. Anyhow, in passing, this security check is not an alterizable proposition. So don't let people edit them, and don't edit them when you're giving them. You say, have you ever done any illicit diamond buying? IDB, well, it's even a phrase in South Africa. Do you know how many PCs we've caught in England and America on this? Well, it's fascinating, you know? Because it doesn't fall on illicit diamond buying necessarily. It falls on anything to do with diamonds. And people, the weirdest things they will do with diamonds. They smuggle them and they swallow them and they... Now that question alone is left in there as a bit of a gag. It's to identify the check. And probably at the end of time, I hope to keep that question in. Have you ever done any illicit diamond buying? Just to identify the source of the check. But very shortly, this is going to become HCOWW Form 4. Security Form 4. And it will be called by another name. It will be called by another name. Probably be called an HGC Processing Questionnaire. See, something very mild and innocuous, but it'll still be HCOW Form 4. There actually will be a few more questions. There will be a whole section in there which could be at once applied to the student and could be applied to the HGC PC. We found that an awful lot of HGC PCs hang up in processing because they get mad at the chief registrar or they're discourteous to the receptionist or something, and they're just having an awful time this particular morning, and we don't quite understand why they're having a hard time. It isn't what we think they should do. It's evidently what they think they should do, you see. They're having a dreadful time, and they start asking for withholds, and they get a fall, and they can't imagine what dreadful thing this is, and they find out the PC didn't say good morning to the housey registrar. See, it's a withhold. They meant to say good morning, but they decided not to say good morning. Then they decided it was discourteous that they had done this. You got the idea. And they get messed up with withholds on Central Org personnel or Scientologists just in really the relatively few days that they're around the place, because they come in, you see, on obsessive, unkind thought automaticities. See, they walk in and they got unkind thoughts going off automatically, see, and it's going 1,000 miles a minute. You know, unkind thought here, an unkind thought there, an unkind thought someplace else, an unkind thought someplace else, an unkind thought someplace else. And golly, these things get square across their processing line. So it is in an effort to keep auditors from breaking their hearts and people from wasting their money, you have to give a full check. There will be a new section in it then that refers to students and pre-clears the kinds of things that they possibly might do, and there will probably be a section in there for the benefit of the field auditor. Like, have you said anything unkind to anybody you know about your auditor? You got the idea? Well, you'd be surprised how many things are going to fall, and this auditor's trying his best, and he all feels good about it all, and this PC is just withholding like crazy because he goes out in propitiation and gets even with the auditor by telling everybody in the neighborhood what a dirty rat he is, and that he keeps 7 women under the bed. He only keeps 2. Now, the only way you can make one of these things work is to clean things up at the same time you're using it. You see, it's a two-edged sword. If you're going to be reprehensible about unkind thoughts about Scientologists and organizations, and if this holds people up, then we should be quite militant on setting it up so that we don't merit these things. You see? And this includes, I don't know, I can think of several dirty words. Offhand, speaking of unkind thoughts, there's been somebody crashing around the United States who's evidently, since 1952, has been complaining to me bitterly about all of the thetans that come in the night and PDHing. And he's now gone on an all-out in the United States, and he's writing mimeograph sheets to everyone, telling them that they've been PDH'd and that everybody in God's green earth has PDH'd them, and all Central Organization members have PDH'd them, and I've PDH'd them. What conceit! And I've shown you the little trick and actually written an article in Ability in America, which is probably out right about now. It's the sad TAIL of PDH. And it's how you can demonstrate conclusively that the cat has PDH'd you. That's a piece of our technical training around here now. So those of you who just come in, get somebody to show you with you on the meter that the cat has PDH'd you. The meter will say so, if you don't know how to run a meter. Or if you know how to run a meter very, very well, you can make a meter say almost anything by getting associative words in. And of course, if you really knew a meter, they wouldn't fool anybody, because they'd see the sporadic and uneven falls, you see. It's just the association of words. Anybody will get a fall on pain, anybody's liable to get a fall on drug, anybody's liable to get a fall on hypnosis, and anybody's liable to have done anything to a cat. So what you do is spot the moment when he's done something to the cat, and that's the date the meter will answer up as has the cat PDH'd you. He just picked the moment of the overt, that's all. He can pick the exact moment on the time track of something like this, as long as he had an overt right at that instant. See, if it clicks. It's marvelous. Difficulty is that a meter will not clear on an untruth. If the PC is, you've still got an untruth, and you're trying to foist off on the PC some untruth, the meter won't clear on it. But as soon as you put the PC through the jumps on this kind of thing, why, the PC clears on it. Okay. All right, how does a person get in a kind of a state that he'd run around saying all such incredible things and so on? Well, he gets in that kind of state because he's had the case advanced without ever anybody pulling his withholds. So countering the fact that it might be a little bit embarrassing to have some of these things disclosed is the fact that if it isn't administered, you don't get any case gain and actually will practically torture PC by processing him for a long period of time without getting off his withholds. In other words, it's a very unkind thing to do, to use tools that boost his case way up and leave him with all of his withholds, because his withholds now turn in with responsibility to overts about which he's going to feel very bad. He managed to stay sufficiently irresponsible, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da, they bothered him. And all of a sudden he gets a little more responsible, and he said, I don't think it was nice to strangle that little girl. I don't think that was so nice. I wonder if it hurt her. And on about this time, he gets a little more case advanced, and he said, oh, God, you know. But, of course, I don't dare tell anybody. They'd execute me. So he gets another little bit of a case advanced, and he said, yeah. He gets another little case advanced, and actually he could get to a state where he'd be going around craving peppermint candy. You have forced him into a life continuum. You've snapped the valence in on him. You've increased his responsibility without permitting him to be responsible for what he's done. And when you increase a person's potential responsibility without letting them be responsible for what they have done, no more desperately vicious mechanism could exist in processing. You got it? So if you don't administer a good, tough security check, and if you don't keep that security check good, and keep it whole, you're just setting it up for PCs, not only to not be cleared, but actually to start feeling miserable. Oddly enough, feeling miserable, they're better off than they were being irresponsible. You got the idea. And they'll tell you so, too. But you just peg them. You peg their processing game. It isn't that you do something overt that forces their case down. You peg their processing game, and it'll peg right up to the point where they become responsible for some overt act in the past. And there the case will hang. And that's it. They've had it from there on. And you won't get any further advance out of that case. So one of your rules is when a person ceases to advance rapidly, you just pick up Mr. Joberg and start him at the beginning and run through to the end. And you all of a sudden will find out why. Yeah, but here's your theory. If you get all of these withholds off early in processing, why, you won't run into this, will you? Oh, but wait, he doesn't know anything about these overts. He doesn't even consider the things he's done overts. Here's this girl. She has kept all of her brothers and sisters in a state of total blackmail and terror. The oldest girl of the family or something. She locked them up in closets. She's responsible for one of them now being a permanent cripple and so forth. And you give her a security check, and the first check, the only real withhold that you get off of her, is at the age of about 7, she thought that her sister probably wasn't as pretty as she should be. And that falls on the meter, but nothing else falls. Now the person has to be processed, and you suddenly find these other things. Those withholds come off, you process them again, now you've got a whole new array. And by consistently doing this, one against the other, processing against the security check, you have an indirect measure of the progress of the case, as well as opening up the road for the case to drive on it. Because if the person doesn't have any new withholds, you have laid a large ostrich egg in your last few hours of processing. See? But if you find new withholds on a case that weren't hitherto disclosed, you know you're making progress. So don't say to yourself, oh, I must be terrible at security checking, because after all, I ran him on a general levels for about 8 hours and so forth. But just before that, I must have missed all of these withholds. Look at them. How could I have been that stupid in running an E-meter? No, they weren't there. Because a person has to have some reality on a terminal or a condition before it falls on an E-meter. And that's why you assess terminals, is because you don't want to run a terminal on which the PC has no reality. And when this thing reacts, it says reality. You could call it an ARC meter, and you'd just be in dandy shape. It says reality. Reality. Now, you know what's wrong. You know what's wrong with Mamie Zilch. You know it's her husband. You know. So you take right off and don't use an E-meter, and you run, now, Mamie. Now, Mamie, you heard this process, OW. What have you done to your husband? What have you withheld from your husband? What have you done to your husband? What have you held to your husband? And so forth. Mamie said, let's see, I actually find the question very difficult to answer. I've really never done anything to the brute. He kept throwing me down wells. And every time he'd back the car out of the garage, he'd call me out just to make sure that I was standing right behind it so that he could run into me. And he used to write letters. I never saw any of these letters, but he used to write letters to all of my friends saying that I had venereal disease. Let's see, what else did he do to me? You say, no, the question is, what have you done to him? I've never done anything to him in my life. You say, wait a minute. What goes on here? Well, what goes on here is very simple. The PC has not taken any responsibility for any acts with regard to her husband. Now, it doesn't matter whether the husband was a good man or a bad man, you understand? The PC has taken no responsibility for these acts, and so there's nothing the PC has done to the husband is real. So what is the source, and why do you come about with overts and withholds anyhow? It's basically, they're based on something getting unreal to the PC. So the more overts and withholds a PC has, the less a PC registers on the meter, and you finally find the PC floating here at 2 with a totally stuck needle. They won't move off 2. You can't get the tone arm off 2. Sensitivity is up here at 16. You say to them, gee, you must be clear. You know, a lot of people checking out clears very early rather intended to invalidate the state of clear because they didn't know anything about a meter at all. There was very little known about a meter. But it takes that free-floating needle. It takes that needle there that is going to... When you first see one of these free-floating needles, they're unmistakable. It's awfully hard to fake one. I don't think it could be faked. It's just a smooth flow with no sticks and no reactions. You see, well, that looks an awful... That's with sensitivity way down here. And that looks an awful lot different than a person at toe and the needle totally stuck, and you kick him in the shins and you don't even get a drop of the needle. Well, that's a state of total irresponsibility. That's what that state is, because you're registering a dead state in a body that somehow goes on ticking. You're just getting the body reaction. Well, of course, this PC is going to go down here to 1 through 7. There's 7 on this E-meter, by the way, but it can't turn to it. You once in a while will find a PC there, and you'll go nuts trying to get them on the meter. It'll be down here at 6.5, and then you'll get down here to 5, and you get down here to 4. This is a long, long course of processing, and you'll wobble around here for a while, and you'll finally get back here to 3, or if a girl, get back here to 2, and there it is. It's the same reading all over again. Except the sensitivity is down, and the needle is just floating, and the needle's no longer stuck. Okay? But that's a high state of responsibility. Now, how can a person take responsibility for his acts unless you give him a chance to? And if he does take responsibility for his acts and isn't able to communicate them to you, he goes out of session. He blows. He doesn't finish his intensives. He doesn't keep on with the auditor. He gets upset about auditing. All these various evils we have seen in the past are all explained by this mechanism. The person goes up and hits the ceiling, and the ceiling is the number of withholds for which he's become responsible, and that he can't tell anybody. So you got to take out the ceiling and let him move up to the first floor. You got the idea? So here's the picture, in other words, of this new bulletin. It just plays this mechanism about which I've been talking, one against the other. You give the person a case game with the fastest tools you know how, and his responsibility is increased so you get off his withholds. And the best thing to use, according to what auditors will use and auditors have used, is this thing called a security check. It asks them all, man. And if there's anything missing on it, they'll eventually appear on it. We don't care how long it takes to give a security check because it's an unkindness not to give one. That's the story of this bulletin. That's the background of this bulletin. Perhaps a person can run SOP goals on a person right out of an institution. If he were a good auditor, he could actually get the person's goals and so forth. Now, it might take him $200. The PC would be advancing the whole time. It's merely what auditors will do. And at the present time, you don't want anything but routines 1 and 2 being run anywhere. You don't want to see these things run anywhere, including Los Angeles. You ought to send a cable tonight saying a bulletin is coming to you, date so-and-so. Use nothing but routines 1 and 2, and if I catch you using any other routines, I will have a few bleeding hearts because I can now run out my overts. I'm dangerous. Got the idea? Why? Because they proved abundantly that they can run levels 1 and 2. And they proved abundantly they can't run level routine 3. They have proven this abundantly. Some of the people who turn up here, some of the goals that have been found on them, man, all you do is ask them twice and you can't find it in the back of the meter or the bottom of the meter or anything else, and yet they've been run on it. Now, do you know what can happen if you find the wrong goal, wrong terminal on a PC? You can live up the whole prehab scale. That's what's going to happen. And this is one of the tests. About the 3rd time you have found a level, about the 3rd assessment you give him on the terminal you have found, watch that list as you assess it. And if there's something on the order of a dozen levels live, you got the wrong terminal. The wrong terminal makes every level of it live. But the state you're putting the poor critter into. The thing is so compiled that about 4 levels of it will be live anyway. You'll have 4 levels of it. But if a dozen up, a dozen or more, are hot and alive on this scale, it's not there's something wrong with the rudiments, it's just something is wrong with that terminal. So along about your 3rd reassessment, you could do a check on SOP goals. But that's kind of vicious, because do you know that if you only partially flatten levels on the general prehab scale, on the goals terminal, you know, you can make the fellow feel like he's nuts. He starts going kind of nuts. Well, you're driving a 10,000 horsepower machine. See, and it starts feeling kind of, it's got level after level unflat. You yourself can demonstrate that. We had some auditor up here. He was being coached over the telephone from St. Hill running somebody once. He had all of his data. He had it all laid out in tape. He could run it off like a pat. There wasn't any reason under the sun he shouldn't have done it. You know what he did? He ran 4 levels in an afternoon on one piece. Because he'd interpreted the instructions, which wording, by the way, never occurred in any instructions and doesn't. He said he interpreted the instructions because they were written wrong. Well, they weren't written wrong. I went and checked it out. On all the bulletins you never find. You barely take the motion out of the tone arm and then you reassess. That was what he thought the instruction said. It doesn't even use those words. You could say, reverse-wise, you run it till the tone arm is barely moving, but not even these instructions occurred in the literature and instructions he was given. He couldn't even have made that mistake. It's sort of a, Now, the assessment was fairly accurate and had been done for him. He didn't even have to do that. In other words, faced with goals and terminals, a lot of these people sort of go to pieces. It takes a lot of training. Furthermore, the PC is so easily ARC broken, so very easily upset. He advances so rapidly that his responsibility is rising up to a point where he's got withholds by the bucket coming up all the time, and if he isn't well handled with perfect mechanical approach, perfect technical, perfect TRs, perfect D-meter operation, I mean perfect, well, you're never going to clear anybody. That's it. I was going to say I can always tell when somebody's mad at me they don't come to my lectures. That happens to be a coordinated fact, you know that? People who haven't attended my lectures in the past in central organizations eventually squirreled in some fashion. Odd. Peculiar. So I always look around to see who's there, you know. It's my security check. All right. Now, this is the 7th of June, isn't it? Marcabian intelligence report date, something or other. You hear about the Marcabians who had to PDH the Thedians, who had to, in order to make Frank Sullivan safe for democracy. Anyhow, it's a wonderful life. All right. Now, I lectured to you yesterday on HCOB, June 5, 1961, tried to give you some very fast general coverage concerning it, and this bulletin was issued to you today. This bulletin is based totally, completely on what we have found people would do and what people can do. And they can do these, and although I can tell you innumerable ways to punch buttons on cases, innumerable ways to become aesthetically telepathic about cases, read their facsimiles, and all kinds of weird things like this, it doesn't happen that over the last 11 years people have uniformly been able to duplicate this. So as a result, we have techniques and technologies, and we have taken it all down out of the beautiful esoterics of esoteria and have got it well situated now into the ponderous clank of something that can be totally understood and duplicated. Okay? The trick of communication in Dianetics and Scientology is the interesting trick back of all the tricks. That is the one thing that has been the most difficult and is probably the greatest achievement. Other people might look at other things, but learning how to get things understood is one of the most difficult things, without developing a large vocabulary. We could easily do this by inventing 18 dictionaries and the 8,000 new terms you have to learn as a medical student and so forth. We've got somewhere around 400 terms that are 472 terms, I think, include all of the oddball ones we don't even use. In common usage, I think a Scientologist vocabulary probably isn't over about 75 or 80 words that are completely strange and peculiar and have their own meanings. But once you define these words, once these words are defined, people look at them and realize there was no such word. So we've had to make something that sounds like English, you see, then mean something. And it's very odd. As soon as I get out the dictionary, which I'm doing, I do that between 7 a.m. and 7:05. I must have an overt on buzzsaws, though. I did get to bed for a couple hours sleep this morning, and I no more than closed my eyes than Farmer Jones opened up on a buzzsaw. And you know he's perfectly tuneless on the thing. He can't play it worth a darn. So he has now got another black mark in his book and our books. And factually, not for that reason at all. Everybody's being very fed up because they open up his book now and they find nothing but total black pages. You know, he's run out of black marks. But trying to communicate to him, for instance, anything about anything is a very good example. Here's an actual example. You try to explain what the situation is all about. You draw a blank. You draw a complete blank. But he responds like mad to processing, even anything as corny as a touch assist. I ran an engram on him one day standing out in the front drive. The odd part of it was his hand recovered and everything else. He'd been kicked by a cow in a milk pail. And at first he thought the milk pail had kicked him. He didn't know when it happened. He couldn't locate when it occurred. It was sometime between breakfast and supper. He didn't know at what moment what had happened. He had no clue. And he was having a rough time. His hand was all crippled up and he couldn't milk. So I stood him out here in the front drive and ran out a bad hand. He became rather pathetically curious afterwards as to what we were doing. There's no language to talk about it, you see. That's the trouble you have, you see. The no language barrier. It's the no language barrier. These words do not exist in the language because the understanding didn't exist in the language. Now, words are based on agreed upon understandings. And English is a Johnny-come-lately language. Most of these postulates haven't been made or thought of for the last 200 trillion years. You're going to express them in English. People don't even know these principles. However, you tell him a definition of a word carefully, using, using 20, 30 words, something like that, a definition of a word. He doesn't latch onto the word rapidly because the concept is brand new to him, and he's rather stonied by the definition. This is something that's never occurred to him before. He can sense the truth of it. Something is going ding, ding, ding. That's true, you know. That's true. But he can't quite grasp it. And while he's still in the throes of grasping this, recognizing there's a truth there, if you threw right on top of it a condensation of your explanation in his cognition in just the few letters contained in one word, you've almost collapsed the track on him, don't you think? He has to realize the principle before he can take the word. You got that? It goes reverse-wise. A child has to find out that the stove is warm before he begins to understand what warm stove means, don't you think? On a thought level, they have to understand the concept. Well, this is almost like processing. It used to be fellows would read the axioms and read things about it and get all sorts of cognitions. And, you know, Dianetics, evolution, the science, we have numerous cases of people in hospitals having been given this or finding it and just reading the book and throwing back the covers and getting up and sliding into their shoes, much to the horrors of the nurse, and leaving and never being sick again. What did this? It was basically a resurge of hope that there was some understanding of all this, don't you see? But it was the understanding alone. So the understanding operates as processing. You got it? It operates that way, as clarifications. Well, until you have somebody who has wrapped his wits around some of the principles so that he isn't still going, let me see, are all men bad? Are all men good? I wonder if all men are good, all men are bad. There probably is two different kinds of people. There's the good people and the bad people. I knew a nut one time that used to say, well, there are two kinds of people. There are happy people and unhappy people, and you're an unhappy person. And then she would add gloomily, and I'm a happy person. See, she had this all worked out. And you all of a sudden shoot something in and say people are Thetans, and there's the overt motivator sequence. And what they do to others, why they think is done to them. Boy, you just fired a philosophic salvo of fleet intensity. See? Well, you know, and everything is reverberating from horizon to horizon. You see? And you say, now, do you get the word overt motivator sequence? Oh, you don't understand the word yet. Well, you're stupid. And in training people, they actually have to learn the principles before they learn the words. That'll make this dictionary rather interesting reading. Because they look at the word, and they're perfectly willing to commit that to memory. And then they read the definition, and the fleet salvo reverberates from horizon to horizon, and they say, what word was that? What word was that, you know? You know, that's submerged, that's gone. What are we connected with? What planet is this, you know? That kind of thing. And then they finally come around and they look at it again, and then they look at it again, and then they run into it with familiarity, and then they get more and more familiar with it, and then all of a sudden they know the word. See, they can package it because the understanding of it is so easily understood that it is thought-wise transmittable. You got the idea? Until that time, they can't learn a vocabulary. Now, you can do anything you want to teach people how to learn a vocabulary, but you run against the principle of the communication of the idea that is packaged in the word. And these ideas have not been familiar to man. All right, doing that in a relatively simple way might look complicated to people simply because their basic difficulty is trying to grasp some principle, and they haven't got a good idea of what an overt motivator sequence is, and every time they try to face it, it sort of blows the words overt motivator sequence. They become meaningless, and what they haven't done is grasp the principle of the overt motivator sequence. It is not that they haven't grasped the words. They can spout the word parrot fashion, but they cannot understand this other principle, don't you see? See what we're connecting up when we're training people. Actually, would have no sounder method of educating somebody than teaching him the principles of Scientology under the guise of teaching him the vocabulary of Scientology. Got the idea? They couldn't help but have a repercussion. All right, now similarly, the operation or actions which we undertake apparently are liable to shortness of understanding or misunderstanding. Therefore, what will be done and what can be done by a person in Scientology, by a Scientologist, is monitored by what he can easily understand and what he is willing to perform. And you have that right here. And this is quite a triumph, this HCOB June 5. Now, to a non-trained person, this bulletin would probably be gobbledygook, because it doesn't explain too much here. It's dependent on other publications, you see. It says CCHs. Well, of course, we've been through the ropes and we know what the CCHs are, but that wouldn't mean anything to, I don't know, Menninger. Presuming he's still alive. CCHs. It must be something made up. Something made up. No, you say, no, it's a repetitive thing. It's actually control, communication, and havingness. When you apply control, you obtain communication, which gives the pre-clear havingness. And it is a method of entrance on cases which is rather infallible. And that's what CCHs mean. Look where you'd leave Menninger. He wouldn't be around there, that's all. In the first place, you've enunciated to him a principle that psychiatry, if it had any teeth left, would give them all if they had a formula by which they could actually bring back some sanity. See? They haven't got that. So you've thrown him this formula and controlled him as electric shocking people, and communicating with people is electric shocking people, and havingness to him is electric shock or psychosis. So it adds up to him, control, communication, it'll drive people crazy. Got the idea? His adjudication. You see how he'd arrive at the point where it'd drive people crazy? Because his havingness is psychotics. This is all the havingness the man has, obviously. Okay, so control, that's electric shocking people. And communication, that's electric shocking people, because he knows you can't. And havingness, that electric shocks. And psychosis. Psychosis, you can have psychosis. So that if you ran the CCHs on anybody, you drive them crazy. And they electric shock people because it drives them crazy. You see, you're baffled because you don't realize that you're dealing with short-circuited thinking. A equals A, therefore you do it. Fact equals contrary fact, so you dramatize it. So you're not even in that case dealing with thinking. I'm not berating these people, I'm merely saying that there couldn't be any thinking, because there's bulletin after bulletin that they themselves put out continually saying that surgery and electric shock do nothing but harm people. And they go right on ordering them and doing them. You see? So there must be a short-circuited thinkingness. So you're not penetrating at that level at all. Now how are you going to penetrate? You say to this fellow, all right, now look, Joburg processing check. That is a series of questions which are asked the person to obtain from them data which they ordinarily have not handed out. And right away, manager says, Catholic Church. See? So we now have the fact that we are driving people crazy by using the mechanisms of the Catholic Church. You get how you get a no-think out of this. This would be the no-think. Well, it's very interesting to see how these things add up. But they are not gobbledygook to you because you've experienced a great many of these things. You've experienced them all. The only thing you possibly haven't experienced is being clear, and you possibly have not seen a clear floating needle. Matter of fact, I told an auditor in HGC London the other day they ought to take the PC around and show the auditors a clear, free-floating needle. And I got into the most oddball yippity-yap you've ever heard of. Why? Because this is an unfamiliarity. We're in a zone of unfamiliarity, and even the dispatch was misinterpreted. It caused a great deal of randomity, this dispatch. The PC got hold of it and interpreted it that I was forcing upon her the concept that she was clear. The auditor must have interpreted it similarly because never showed it, this clear floating needle, type needle, to any of the other auditors. The only thing I wanted them to do, if anybody cared to read the thing, the only thing I wanted them to do was to be able to look at a floating needle. Nobody'd ever seen one up there, see? And this is a floating needle, and here was a wonderful opportunity for somebody to see a floating needle. And instead of that, PC is ARC, broken, has to be run in the next session. Look at the randomity that suddenly developed here. Pretty wild, you know. You say, auditors, I want you to show a floating needle. PC has an ARC break. Auditor doesn't go anywhere near anybody. PC has a present time problem. The auditor's mad at me because I've upset the PC. Okay, PC was haunting HCO. Shouldn't have been, watching things coming over the telex. Oh, wow. Well, look, that's the only thing on this bulletin that the auditors in London wouldn't have a fair familiarity with at this stage. And it caused randomity. So it takes a little while to develop an understanding of things, right? You shouldn't be teaching somebody above their zones of reality, really. But you can reach them with processing. And they then do gain a subjective reality on the thing. And you can reach them in numerous ways, don't you see? And you actually could teach them a bunch of these philosophic level principles, and then they even get a vocabulary as they got a subjective grasp on these things. But it's an auditing process. It blows interbulation off the case, and while it is blowing off the case feels confused. So the instant reaction of manager is, this is terribly confusing, I haven't got anything to do with it. I had a psychiatrist reading Dianetics, and he was rushing out every few minutes and putting the electrodes on somebody and coming back. He said, yes, I've looked at this book. This book came in the other day. It came in the other day, and I looked at it, and I reported it to the association. I think it's disgraceful. And he said, I'm a Horneye. I said, well, what philosophy do you follow in your psychoanalysis? He said, I'm a Horneye man myself. I'm a Horneye man. And he rushed out and shot somebody else and came back in again. And he said, I'm a Horneye man. And I said, well, I saw it while he was gone. I said, Horneye, Karen Horneye. So I said, well, what is Horneye? What is the Horneye offshoot of Freudian analysis? So she says, I don't know. I never read it. It'd be different, I'll tell you that for gag. Actually, that's totally factual. Unbelievably true. He was a Horneye man, but he'd never read anything by Horneye. I don't know. How do you get it? Telepathy? I think they'd call it probably Freudianly telepathic emission. Something like that. If you keep a book on a shelf long enough, why, you'll get it by contagion or something. Maybe some years later he expected as long as the book sat on the shelf, why, he would become all of a sudden imbued with its characteristics. Well, anyway, none of this bulletin to a Scientologist is apparently incomprehensible. And the only place a Scientologist gets in trouble out in the field and untrained is in doing goals assessments and trying to run SOP goals. He can run into too many things. Now, for instance, we just run into one on a case today. Case was apparently flat on a level on the case's terminal. Apparently flat. But wasn't. Wasn't. Couldn't have been. Because the case was still worried about the level. Well, we were running the principle of running the rock slam out of the needle rather than running the motion out of the tone arm. And now a question enters. Is this right? I mean, is it right just to run the rock slam out? Or should you actually flatten that level? But nevertheless, this case does not answer the problem, because this case might have had a present time problem not detected by the auditor, or after the rudiments are checked out, suddenly had a present time problem. See, the rudiments sort of boost the case's reality, and all of a sudden the case realizes it has a present time problem, so now doesn't get a rock slam. The process isn't biting. Actually, their mind is on something else, so the auditor thinks it is flat. Tone arm motion reduced, in other words, by reason of a rudiment out. And the tone arm moving so little that the auditor would be brought to the conclusion that it was flat. I would be brought to the conclusion it was flat reading the report, don't you see? So we go off and assess for another level. And then we come back and find the rock slam there 100% because some PTPs have been handled on the PC. In other words, we have this odd adjudication that we can put on running terminals, and that is that if a PC has a rudiment out, a level can look flat, which isn't. And you can put that down in your book, because we've just discovered it and proved it out factually. Because when we went back to this level, 2 levels have been run since, but the case was bogging. And in patch-up of cases on general run of prehab, and on patch-up of cases in general run of the terminal, of the goal, if a case isn't making much progress, you had better go back. That's why you must keep your auditor's reports. This is the way to patch one up. Is go back and pick the earliest level run that might not have been flat, and flatten the level, and come on up to the next level after that and flatten that, because that will now probably be unflat. In other words, you've got to flatten every level now that you've left unflat, and all levels will tend to be unflat since the level you left unflat. You got it? So you must keep your reports. The case apparently bogs. Well, the case had a PTP or an ARC break or something like that, and it wasn't detected. And for that reason, the tone arm ceased to move, and you say the level is flat. And it's not, and you run a few more levels, and all of a sudden the case is having more and more PTPs, and more obsessed with upsets and problems and so forth. Well, the way to patch that up is to go back and review the tone arm figures on each level that was run at its end. See? Get the end run. Review the last 20 minutes of every process level that has been run on the PC. Okay? And pick the earliest one that you suspect may not be flat. Got it? And to be on the safe side, pick the earliest one that you suspect, but you could, there could be a little bit later one that you might suspect more, but you wouldn't quite be able to decide. Well, if you couldn't quite decide, it usually will be quite obvious to you. But if you couldn't decide, well, go back and pick the earliest candidate and run it, because they'll flatten off rather quickly. You got it? Now, take all the motion out of the level this time. Just run it down to a point of where it just grinds to a brake-smoking halt. Now, what else would you do to patch it up? Well, if you've done a good goals assessment, you've got the hidden standards. You know, the person always looks and finds out if his right ear is no longer burning, so he knows the process is working. This is the standards. Lots of people have these standards. And these standards are actually present-time problems of magnitude, of long duration. And you're running a case with a PT problem that has a hidden standard. Well, why run this? Now, you would do much better to use what it says here about handling problems of long time duration under Routine 2, second page. Problems of long duration. Now, we mean by a problem of long duration, years are within this lifetime. The problem must have existed for years or in this lifetime. Otherwise, it's a PT problem. It's less than a year. It's only months or weeks, hours, minutes, seconds. It's a present time problem of short duration. These are simply artificial labels to give you an order of magnitude. So the difference between a present time problem of short duration and a present time problem of long duration are quite important to you, because you handle a present time problem of short duration always in the rudiments only. Don't take it into prehab or into processes or anything like that. Just put it into the rudiments. And the rudiments processes, they're supposed to be run in the rudiments, will handle it, and you shouldn't do any more about it than that. But a present time problem of long duration, which means more than a year and less than a lifetime, this lifetime, see? You do a terminal assessment, just like you were doing a goals assessment, and you just keep hammering and hammering and hammering and running, and it's not something you do in 20 minutes, the way I've been getting it in auditor reports. Well, we did a terminals assessment for the present time problem of long duration, and then we assessed for the level, and we immediately got to running it, and you look up at the assessment, and it's 5 minutes. Oh, 5 minutes. How interesting. You mean you could get a list of all terminals which might be involved in this problem and do an assessment by elimination in 5 minutes? Oh, yes. Like hell you could. You're looking at a couple of sessions, man. Let's get real. This person has a hidden standard. His right ear, he knows whether processes are working because his right ear doesn't burn. But when his right ear is burning, why, then he knows the process isn't working. You had a case go through HEC London a very short time ago who had some kind of a peculiar thing of some kind of something as unlovely, I think, as if you will excuse me, a vaginal discharge. And when this lessened, the process was working, and when it got increased, the processes weren't working, and everything was being barometered by this rather fantastic action. Now, that's nothing against anybody. You'd have to find that out. Well, look, there is something connected here that is real to the PC. It must be more real to the pre-clear than the pre-clear's case, by automatic definition, because the PC uses it as an indicator for his case, so that this thing must then be a substitute for his case. You got that? I mean, a substitute for the case. That's why you must know about hidden standards. In other words, the hidden standard is more real to the PC than any case or life difficulties he is having, because he tries to find out if it is functioning or not functioning. He's sort of packing an E-meter around on the side of his head, don't you see? You got the idea? Well, his attention, obviously, this is merely a problem of attention. There hasn't been a lecture, by the way, on attention and dispersed attention, attention units, and so forth, since I think something ridiculous like the end of June 1950 at the Elks Hall in must have been someplace in New Jersey, Elizabeth. The Elks Hall in Elizabeth, New Jersey. There's a whole hour lecture at that particular time on the subject of attention units and how they are trapped in the bank, and the individual is running only on 1% or 2% of the theoretical 100% of attention available to him because his attention is pinned down in other places of the bank, you see. Well, that's very, very interesting to us today to all of a sudden have this old one suddenly leap into view full armed, see? Because here it is. Here it is. You're working with it right now. You're assessing for a goal to find out where the person has most of his attention. You're assessing for the terminal, and immediately the goal would disintensify that you find the terminal really because, of course, the attention is really fixed on the goal because it is fixed on the terminal. And the second it gets fixed on the terminal, you rather unfix it on the goal, so the goal will read less after you've been assessing terminals a little while. All right, your next point here is that if the PC has his attention on a burning right ear, well, for heaven's sakes, it's practically a total computation sitting right there on the side of the PC's head. So what do? You say, what is it now? Have you worried about that for some time? You say, well, what would have to happen to you for you to know that Scientology works? That is the cute question. PC always answers up, and they give you some of the most remarkable answers you ever heard in your life. Well, to know that Scientology really works, my daughter would have to get over her hives. Oh, come on. This person's attention isn't even on himself. But nevertheless, that is the answer. Well, now, is your daughter having hives been a problem to you for long? Oh, well, yes, specialists. We take them up to Pennsylvania, take them up well. I mean, we've gone down south. We've gone practically every place. We've imported special bees to sting her and followed the very best directions that we possibly can. She still has these hives. And we keep rubbing pickle juice into them all the time. And every night I have to get up 5 times a night and rub pickle juice into her hives so that she can sleep. And this has been going on for some years. And I actually feel guilty about it myself, you see, because one day she walked up to the stove when she was just a little child, and she did, and I spilled onion juice all over her. Well, now, ever since that time, I think she's had these hives. Hey, what better indicator do you want? You say something about the problem, and your PC goes off like a small firecracker. See? Like a string of ladyfinger firecracker, you know? Pop, 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 PC, real interested, yap, 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 brrr, yap, 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 yap. Where do you think their attention is? Attention is on daughter's hives. So to clear this PC, you have to get her daughter's hives out of the way. But you get her concern as a PC's attention off of these hives. If the hives cure up, it's totally coincidental. But they might. Now, here's the hidden standard. And this hidden standard keeps more people from getting released or cleared than any other single thing I know of except withholds. Okay, so it's just junior in rank to withholds for holding people up and holding cases up, you know. And actually, the present time problem is right on the goals chain. Always is. Otherwise, it couldn't be a problem of long duration, somehow connected with it. So if you scrape the top off, the case assesses much more rapidly. That's the least that would happen. You might find yourself thoroughly straight on the goals line if you did a very good assessment. You short-circuited the whole thing, and this is running like a bomb. And after you've run 3 levels on this present-time problem terminal of long duration, you assess the thing very carefully, and you don't find the prehab scale live on a dozen levels. Oh, cool. You must be straight on the PC's line. And it didn't take you 72 hours to do the assessment. It took you more like about 5. So you get the values of a hidden standard? It's something to pay attention to. Something very interesting. Besides being terribly amusing. I'll swear I have heard some of the weirdest statements that Homo sap has ever made, I'm sure, when I talk to them about hidden standards. What would have to happen for you to know that Scientology worked? Oh, well, confidentially, whenever I've been processed, I see whether or not my right foot ticks. And if it stops ticking, then I know we're on the way. But if it starts ticking, I know we're off. You get the most interesting answers. Now you say, what else? You don't ever ask this, but I can pursue the question line in other directions, and it becomes practically ridiculous. You say, what else do you use this right foot for? You wouldn't ask that in processing, but you get the most fascinating answers. They sometimes use it to find out if people are mad at them, what the weather's going to be, whether or not the food is going to agree with them, whether or not they're going to be sick. You know, in epilepsy, the fellow always knows a certain feeling when he's going to have a fit. See, and he knows if he gets a certain condition, he's going to have a fit. Well, they use these hidden standards the same way. They know they're going to have some bad luck. Well, the nervous stomach, for instance. The fellow's nervous stomach turns on, he knows he's going to have some bad luck. He knows there's some bad luck coming up one way or the other. He uses his stomach to measure the future. You find all sorts of people. This is the most common one. Now, what would have to happen for you to know that Scientology works? Well, my nervous stomach would have to turn off. Oh, you say? Your nervous stomach would have to turn off. Well, very interesting. How long have you had this nervous stomach? Well, ever since I was a child. Well, now, does it ever turn off in processing? Anything ever turned it off in processing? No, I keep watching it. And then all of a sudden, brrr, yap, 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 and this auditor and that auditor, and we ran this and we ran that, and we did this and we did that and the other thing, and so on and so on and so on, and there's stomach, see? Hidden standard, hidden standard, hidden standard. You got the idea? Well, it's almost an assessment when you strike the fire on the PC's interest. See? He's going to be in session on that. Man, is that PC going to be in session? Well, he's already willing to talk to the auditor about it. He's already interested in it. So his attention must be parked around there someplace. Now, the mistake we have made is not assessing this nervous stomach. We can ask all sorts of embarrassing questions, such as, whose stomach is it? We can do a pre-session 38 type terminal search. We can do all sorts of things with this thing. That's the who, or what, who and when. What's wrong, and who had that trouble, and when did he have it. It sometimes knocks the whole problem out, just discovering this. But now, instead of running a pre-session 38 type of operation on it, it is a faster action, but a more, not always a faster action, but more certain, you know, in the interest of certainty, is to do a terminals assessment by elimination on this somatic, or this standard item. Is it his ear? Is it his head? Whose head? Whose ear? You got the idea? And we just, whose might it be? And if he guesses about this thing, and he might be this one's, and might be that one's, and it might be another. You just write all those names down, you see. It might be his inner ear, so you say inner ear. And it might be his lobe, you know, you write down lobe. And it might be his eroglopus. And you say, his what? Don't challenge it. What you want to find out is how to spell it. It's his eroglopus. And that's the mechanism that lets air in and out of the ear, and you never even knew it existed. Neither does medical science. Nobody has ever known this one before but the PC, you see. And you'll find that the reason this line of questioning is so intriguing is because, of course, you have hit the primary source of individuation on the PC. This is the one that makes him different from everybody. It's sort of, he knows who he is. He's the one that has an earache. So he's different than everybody else, so it's the least duplicated area of the bank. So, of course, it'll fire off as an automaticity because it's most out of communication, and therefore most out of control. So, locating the hidden standard and assessing it by elimination, by which you get a long list of terminals. Oh, I don't know, somebody's nervous stomach, you ought to wind up with a list of terminals of something like 200. Something like that. Big. Ever since we've started doing goals assessments on a highly therapeutic level, it is nothing for people to come up with 546 goals and then come up with 546 terminals on that one goal. This takes some time and it takes some doing. You don't do assessments in a part of a session and then get the show on the road, because you're usually wrong. I should talk to you about something in assessments. It's just occurred to me. I mentioned it to one auditor a short time ago and used the phrase, and it's never been used before, but it certainly is something that you should know something about. It's called a cognition surge, and it can throw your whole assessment awry. It's a cognition surge, and is the source of most of the charge you get on the bank. It isn't, when you're going over a whole bunch of goals and that sort of thing, and the individual all of a sudden says, well, what do you know? I have always wanted to shoot magpies, and I don't even know what they are. Your E-meter will react rather violently. It's a cognition surge. It's a release of electrical charge that goes along with the person having a cognition. And if you watch an E-meter carefully, often when they're having a cognition, a real cognition, you will get a marked fall. Well, when you're assessing and you ask for another terminal, the person sometimes all of a sudden says, what do you know? Airplane pilot, of course, see? And you get a steep fall that has nothing to do with anything really, but the fact that he's cognited that he might have had something to do with airplane pilots. And this is what it's falling on. It's sort of on the possible association, and you'll get a mad drop. Now, another thing, when you're sometimes assessing for level, which is more common, the individual all of a sudden realizes that there is such a thing as fighting wasps. This has just never occurred to him before, see? And you're reading along, you're reading the assessment, and it says fighting, scrapping, knifing, burning, and so forth. All right, now right about the time you've entered into this line, you say fighting, and you get a great big drop on the needle. And you say, boy, with that much drop, that must be it. I won't assess any further. And have you just pulled a bloomer? Because it says fighting and drops like mad, and that's why you always do them at least twice, you see, once up and once down. And the next one, burning, scrapping, burning. Now you come back over the list again, and it says fighting, and it is just as dead as a mackerel. And you say, well, that is the most peculiar thing. How was it so hot when now it's so cold? Well, you read a cognition surge. The person, it's a what do you know? There is a possibility of sometime or another fighting a wasp, you know? What do you think of that? Incredible. Nobody could possibly fight a wasp. I always have known that. And here's the idea, but it's a funny thing about I've never thought of this idea before, don't you see? It isn't the terminal level that you should run. It is simply the fact that he had an idea at that instant. When you come back over it again, it's flat. There's nothing disappears off a meter faster. Sometimes when you're assessing terminals, you will find that terminal after terminal in turn pick up the cognition surge. And it only lasts for about 5 or 10 questionings on the terminal. It's just, this fellow has never thought of himself as having been even remotely connected with being a rocket jockey. This is not a possible connection, don't you see? And not being a possible connection, of course you get a tremendous blow, bang, thud at the idea of being connected with a rocket jockey. But it doesn't have anything to do with the fact that the terminal is rocket jockey. Got the idea? A cognition surge actually occurs when an associated terminal or associated level to the one you're looking for blows off rather violently. And this happens during assessments of goals, terminals, and levels. And when you get a disassociation, all of a sudden, the guy all of a sudden gets rid of that one. Your meter will react. And your meter won't react again. And the source of probably most bad assessments, or most assessment errors, is when the DFP sets the guy down, it falls off the pin, and they say, that's the terminal. No, it's not the terminal. That was the charge a terminal made leaving. See? Now you ask them again about the same terminal, and you get a little flip, and you ask them again about it, and man, is it gone. But sometimes the terminal will look terribly hot for about 12 recounts. Just look hotter than a pistol. And the PC is getting interested in it, but the PC's interest is not because he is that terminal or is being that terminal, but because that terminal is blowing. He has just never inspected the fact that his unknown terminal was connected with this now known terminal. Well, the inspection of this will give you an E-meter reaction, but it's a very short duration reaction. That's why on a gold terminal you grind them out by elimination. That is why on the terminal assessment you grind them out by elimination, and a PT problem of long duration you always grind out by elimination, because you'll just get nothing but cognition surge after cognition surge after cognition surge after cognition surge, and it's the one that's left you want. Because all of these things, you've entered already a random area. You've got to goal fast, you see, which is actually to do something about, only we're not quite sure what, or to learn lessons from a burning right ear, you see. And you're in this brrrr area, and so you get all sorts of fireworks on the meter, you know, and terminals blow, and ideas, and he remembers people he never heard of before. And don't be too surprised if you get a couple of hundred terminals, and by the time you've got them all assessed, he says, "What burning ear?" Okay, don't be too surprised if this occurs. You get how you do this PT problem of long duration. Now, after you've got the terminal, and you do assess it on the prehab scale, you, of course, now run it the same way you do a Gold's terminal. You just run the levels flat. But they run flat awfully fast, so your 20-minute rule doesn't apply. You kind of have to watch the needle. You still can leave one unflat, by the way. You have to go back and pick it up. Various things have to be done. You have to retrack your steps. That's the only other thing I know of in here that you probably didn't know how to do. I hope you know some more about it now, is the assessment for this, because I noticed most flubs at the present instant are now being made in assessing and running present time problems of long duration. And the flub, it just stems from these things. They don't make a terminal list, and they don't do assessment by elimination, and they grab too quick at these cognition surges. Got them? All right, once more, I didn't ask you for any questions today. Some of you are now going to have terrible withholds. Okay. Is there any fast one anybody really has to know before session tomorrow? All right, thank you very much. Good night.